Exposed. SEAL Endgame Book 2 by Leslie North. Chapter 1. What do you mean Jeff can't come with me for my story? Beth Williams glanced around the quiet newsroom. Heads popped up over cubicle walls. She lowered her voice to continue her phone conversation with her editor. What happened? Is he okay? He's in pretty lousy shape from what I heard. He's got a spiral fracture of both bones in his lower leg, her editor said. He has surgery tomorrow and then it's going to be a while before he gets around easily. He'll be on crutches for several weeks and probably loopy from pain meds too. Poor guy. Sorrow for the man who was supposed to be her undercover partner on this story hit her along with her own disappointment. Jeff was a good guy, had a wife, kids, a new mortgage to pay. This accident was probably causing major turmoil to him and his family. Selfish as it might seem, though, she couldn't thinking. But what about me? This story was supposed to be her big break, her chance to make a name for herself. And now, it felt like all her hopes and dreams were crumbling apart right before her eyes. Her frustration increased both at herself and the situation. She sighed and closed her eyes. I feel bad for him. Please tell Jeff and his family I'm thinking of them. Will do, her editor said. And I'm sorry about the story. She ended the call, then sat back, wondering how she might salvage what had promised to be a real scoop. There was something not right with these love-fix couples retreats advertised all over the place. She and Jeff had been researching the expensive counseling trips for nearly a year now. She'd become suspicious of the retreat, held on a private island off the coast of Florida, after talking to a friend of hers who'd been there. When she dug deeper into the place, as much as she could from a distance, she got this strange, tingling feeling that told her she was onto something. She just wasn't sure what yet. And then there was Robert Hart, the mysterious head the retreat's parent company, Hartstrings, Inc. Beth had tried to dig into Hart's past to figure out more about him, but there'd not been much available. He claimed to be a psychiatrist, but she couldn't find his name on any med school alumni lists. If he'd taught anywhere or opened a practice in the United States before starting Hartstrings, she couldn't find any record of it. Frankly, there was no hint that he'd even existed until he came out of nowhere a few years ago and become a media darling to the stars after successfully saving the marriage of a popular celebrity couple. With that kind of publicity and momentum behind him, Hart had turned his attention to these retreats, which were making him major bank. According to the anonymous sources Beth had spoken with, in the last year alone, Hartstrings Inc. had netted close to $1 billion in revenue. Pretty impressive, considering the company had only been in business 3 years. What bothered Beth the most, though, was the fact no one seemed interested in questioning Hart's methods or his credentials. Lord knew it was easy enough to invent a persona these days. Plenty of people had done it and successfully bilked others out of their life savings. And there were a few other warning signs that were setting off all Beth's alarm bells. But she'd hit the limit of what she could find out from a distance. To put all the puzzle pieces together, she knew she needed to go investigate on site. She'd gotten her editor's approval to go in undercover, and it had all been arranged. She'd accounted for everything. Except for Jeff's accident. Crap, just crap. She sat forward in her chair and flipped through the file of documents and notes she and Jeff had compiled over the last few months. If it weren't a couple's retreat, she'd just go ahead on her own. But for this job, she needed a partner. Jeff had been the obvious choice in her mind. Happily married, laid back, a good friend, but not attractive to Beth at all as anything more than that. They knew each other well enough to fake a relationship on the island without any risk of real feelings making everything messy and complicated. It would have been perfect. Sigh. She needed sympathy, so she sent a text to her friend Layla. My story just went to crap. My partner for the retreat broke his leg and is laid up. So disappointed. She ended the text with a frowny face emoji. Sorry, sweetie. That sucks. For you and him. Is there someone else who could go in his place? As she gazed around the newsroom at the other potential candidates, the outlook of continuing was bleak. There was Alan, a geeky dude. Nice enough, but he fell over his own feet whenever Beth even said good morning to him. He was out, while she was flattered by his crush on her. She wasn't looking for a relationship, and she had a feeling Alan would read way too much into an offer to play her spouse, even if it was for an assignment. Her gaze moved on to Don, their financial reporter. The fact he was gay might be an advantage during a couple's retreat. No worries about him trying to come on to her. But he'd just gone through a bad breakup. Asking him to go on a couple's retreat would be like pouring salt in the wound. Finally, she spotted Stan, the sports guy, by the water cooler. He looked up and caught Beth watching him, gave her a wink and a not-so-subtle hike of his pants to accentuate his crotch area, and... ooh. Stan was okay looking, she supposed, in that square-jawed, square-headed jock sort of way, but definitely not her type. She wasn't that much of an actress. If she was going to be fake married to someone, they'd have to have real chemistry or they'd never be believable. Anyone who watched her around Stan would quickly see that her strongest feeling toward him was disgust. She dropped back into her seat. Pickings were slim at the Frisco Times offices. Not good. Not good at all. She was picking up her phone to text Layla back with the bad news when an unfamiliar male voice spoke from behind her. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Beth Williams." Beth glanced back over her shoulder, then froze. She'd expected a delivery guy or messenger, since she had arranged to have some new copies of documents on the Hart case being overnighted to her today. But what she saw was a man who looked like he'd walked right out of her fantasies. Tall, dark, and delicious. She turned slowly and flashed him her best smile, the one that guaranteed she never paid for her own drinks at a bar. Perhaps today wasn't quite as sucky as she'd imagined. She wasn't looking for Mr. Right, but she'd take Mr. Right now if he fell into her lap, and that idea sent her mind spinning into a whole other erotic tangent. Her and this mystery man crashing into each other, falling onto her desk, him taking her right there. She really needed to get out more. Cheeks heated from her wicked thoughts. She took a deep breath and held out her hand. "You found me. What can I do for you?" His grip was strong and sure, his skin warm against hers, and electric sparks of awareness zinged up her arm from their point of contact. From the slight widening of his warm brown eyes, she knew he'd felt it too. "Your brother Heath sent me," he said. "He's been trying to reach you for a couple of days and hasn't gotten a response. He's worried." Beth's shoulders sagged, and she barely caught herself before she rolled her eyes. Figured that on the day her career turned to crap, her older brother would get all overprotective again. No, not again. Always. She loved her brother, but for crying out loud. Heath was like a shadow she couldn't shake. Ugh, she'd been wrong. This day was hitting a new all-time high on the suckage meter. She was tempted to swivel back around to face her desk and just ignore the gorgeous guy in front of her. But as frustrated as she was with her brother, she didn't have the heart to be rude to his friend. It wasn't his fault Heath was a pest. "Please tell Heath that I'm fine. I've just been busy with work." Instead of walking away, as she'd expected, the man stayed right where he was, staring down at her. "He'll be glad to hear that. How'd he drag you into this anyway?" she asked, curious in spite of herself. "Heath and I are on the same SEAL team. We've been through a lot together. Swinging by here to do him a favor felt like the least I could do." He was a SEAL? Well, that explained his buff physique then, and his confident swagger, and his tanned skin, and... Nope, not going there. Any friend of her brother's was definitely off limits, no matter how hot he was. Heath was up her butt enough already. If she got in a relationship with one of his friends, he'd go ballistic. Besides, getting back to sorting out the wreck of her story was more important than handsome SEALs and mother-hen older brothers. "Like I said, I'm fine. Tell Heath that I'll call him when I get a chance, but that things are busy right now, so it might not happen right away." "Got that, Mr. Eric," he said. "Eric Harvey." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Harvey," she said, deliberately using his last name to keep some much-needed distance between them. "You can let Heath know what I said. But for now, I need to get back to work. Bye." He continued to watch her as a full minute ticked past, looming over her like a storm cloud. So, you're a reporter then? He asked finally. Wow, what was your first clue? She said, her snark rising in direct proportion to her irritation. How could a day that started out so good end up so bad? Still, it wasn't this guy's fault and wasn't fair for her to take it out on him. With a sigh, she put on her polite face. Sorry, that wasn't nice of me. Yes, I'm a reporter, an investigative journalist to be precise. She hiked her thumb toward the degree from Stanford hanging on the wall of her cubicle. Got the certificate to prove it. Nice. He narrowed his gaze on her, his expression unreadable. You're not anything like your brother. That was true. Where Heath took after their American father's side with blonde hair and blue eyes, Beth resembled their Vietnamese mother. With her long dark hair and almond-shaped eyes, she and her brother didn't even appear related, if you went by looks alone. But they shared the same drive to succeed and the same unwavering need to protect others, ingrained in them by both of their parents. Her brother had channeled his energies first into his role as big brother and later as a Navy SEAL. Beth had gone a different route, using her brains instead of brawn to tell the stories that needed to be told to right wrongs and keep people safe. Beth loved her brother, but they didn't always see eye to eye, and he often got on her last nerve with his constant intrusions into her life. She suppressed another eye roll. Her family issues weren't this guy's problem. That's very true. You should take it as a compliment, Eric said, chuckling. You're a lot better looking than him. Beth snorted and checked his ring finger out of habit. No ring, no tan line either. Didn't mean he wasn't married, but the odds were in her favor. Not that she cared. Nope. Are you working on a story right now? He asked, leaning one broad shoulder against the wall of her cubicle. His long legs crossed at the ankles. Anything interesting? At his mention of her current investigation, her mood plummeted. I was working on an exposé about a couple's retreat that I think is hiding something shady. But I just got some bad news that my partner's out of commission and won't be able to go undercover with me, so it looks like the investigation is a wash, at least for now. That's too bad. He looked genuinely disappointed for her. Was it time-sensitive? Yeah, it kind of was. She sighed. They only hold these retreats twice a year. If I can't go to the one that starts next week, I'll have to wait 6 months before my next shot. My partner and I were going to pose as a couple and try to discover the truth about what's going on there. She shook her head. But there's no use dwelling on it when it's not happening. A thought occurred to her. If you're on Heath's team, then shouldn't you be off saving the world in some exotic locale? Last I heard from Heath, he was overseas. Right now, I'm on medical leave after shoulder surgery. Surgery? Sounds serious. He shrugged. It wasn't pretty. But I've had enough time to recover. At this point, I'm pretty much back to form, but my team is wrapping up an op, and it doesn't make sense to bring me back in just now. I'll hook up with them again once they're back stateside. I'm sorry about your story. I know that's a bummer. I've worked several undercover ops in the SEALs, and I always hated the way if one thing went wrong, the whole mission was a bust. You prepare for months ahead of time, then poof. Over. He shook his head and checked his watch, then straightened. Well, I should go. I'll tell Heath you're good and get him off your back for a while. He raised a hand as he backed away. Nice to have met you, Beth Williams. Same, she said, watching him walk away, his movements lithe and graceful. She bet he'd look fantastic in swim trunks. Beth scrunched her nose. Where had that come from? It wasn't like she was tapping that. She'd never have the chance to see him in a bathing suit, let alone. The idea struck her out of left field and had her on her feet before she could stop herself. He was unattached, used to undercover missions, and completely off limits. Plus, he was a friend of Heath's, which was clearance enough for his character. In short, he was exactly what she needed in a replacement partner for Jeff. And if she got a little eye candy thrown in for fun, so be it. She grabbed her bag off the desk and caught up with him at the elevators. Hey, do you have somewhere you need to be right now? Eric looked perplexed. Not for a couple of hours. Why? It's almost lunchtime. Want to grab a bite at the cafe next door? She smiled and waggled her wallet in the air. My treat. I've got a proposition I'd like to discuss with you. Chapter 2. Eric blinked at her a moment, stunned by this new development. When Heath had called him that morning about running an errand for him, he'd agreed without hesitation. Heath was a good friend, and Eric considered his SEAL team brothers like the siblings he'd never had. Besides, he needed to get out of the house. Recovery from the surgery after a bullet had wrecked his left shoulder had left him restless and bored. There was only so much baseball a guy could watch, all of which had him dangerously tempted to go along with whatever proposition Beth might have in mind, even if he knew that chances were good that he should stay out of it. He still wasn't back to 100% physically, and while the PT helped, he still had a way to go. Then there was the fact he found her far more attractive than he should. Heath talked about her like she was some wide-eyed kid. Stubborn, impulsive, a little naive. He'd been expecting someone cute but unpolished, maybe with Heath's messy blonde hair. Instead, what he saw before him was a tall, curvy Asian-American goddess with olive skin and doe eyes, her long black hair shimmering beneath the overhead lights. From her ample curves to the slight swell of her hips and the sprinkling of coppery freckles across her nose, she was exactly Eric's type, which meant he should run far and fast from this lunch invitation. Laying one finger on Beth would be the worst betrayal of his friendship with Heath. No way would Heath be down with Eric dating his little sis. The guy freaked out when she didn't return a couple of phone calls. If he discovered there was something going on between her and his best friend, Heath would die of a coronary right after he punched Eric in the face. Still, the elevator was buzzing. Along with Eric's interest, and sitting down to grab a sandwich with her couldn't hurt anything, right? He held the doors for her and waved her inside. Come on, you've got me intrigued. They rode down to the first floor, then walked out into the bright sunshine of a midsummer San Francisco. The Giants were playing the Red Sox later today. Perfect weather for it. Maybe he'd try to get tickets, depending on how this conversation went. A few doors down from the Frisco Times offices was the cafe she'd mentioned. Eric held the door for her, then followed Beth inside. The place was nearly full as noon approached. They got in line to order, then moved down the way to pay and pick up their food. She'd made only small talk since she'd gotten on the elevator, and his interest was growing by the second. Finally, they grabbed their orders and found a quiet table for two near the back of the place. So, what's this proposition you want to discuss with me? He asked after taking a bite of his turkey sandwich. She poured dressing on her salad and mixed it in as she answered. It's the story I was telling you about at the office. I have been investigating Hartstrings, Inc. for months. Ever heard of it? Her dark eyes sparkled with energy, and he forced himself to look away. Wouldn't do him any good to get too dazzled by her. He shook his head. Nope. They run these couples' retreats on a private island about 20 miles off the Florida coast. Sort of counseling on the beach kind of thing. Beth gave a dismissive wave. Her apparent disregard for the so-called romance of the retreats made him grin. Not that there was anything wrong with romance. It just wasn't for him. He didn't do relationships. They involved too many messy emotions and too much trust, neither of which Eric dabbled in. He'd learned his lessons too well from his own parents' dysfunctional marriage. Anyway, Beth said, refocusing his attention on their conversation again, a friend of mine decided to check one of these retreats out. She happens to have an amazing track record for falling for every scam in the book, so as soon as she told me she was going, I got suspicious. I did some initial digging, and it all looks legit on the surface, but weird things kept popping up. The guy in charge, the head of Hartstring, Inc., his name is Robert Hart, and he's a ghost. It's like he didn't exist more than 5 years ago. I think he invented his persona, and why would he do that unless he had something to hide? Sometimes people want a fresh start, Eric offered, playing devil's advocate. And sometimes people are scam artists, Beth argued back, and the only thing they want is a fresh pool of victims. Is anyone complaining about the retreats? No, and that's weird too. People rave about it, but they always say the exact same things, like they're working off a shared script, like they've been coached. Eric still wasn't convinced. The evidence all sounded pretty thin. How about your friend? Does she sound coached? Beth frowned. No, she sounds like her normal self. But her boyfriend, he goes with the party line every time it comes up. And that's another strange thing. Her boyfriend? He's a venture capitalist, a big name in his field, has boatloads of money. But he's not a celebrity. You wouldn't recognize his name if you heard it. And yet, his tickets to the retreat were comped. Those tickets are crazy expensive, and he can certainly afford to pay full price. So why give him those tickets for free? Eric shrugged. Maybe they just hoped he'd recommend the place to all his rich friends. Beth snorted, poking viciously at her salad as if it had offended her. Hart is a media darling with celebrity endorsements up the wazoo. He doesn't need some random VC out there plugging for him. No, I'm certain there's something more going on. There's a story there. I know it. A career-making story, if I can get down there and break it wide open. Huh. At first, Eric hadn't seen much similarity between Heath and his sister. But there it was, right there. Ambition. Heath could be a real go-getter when he wanted to be, and it seemed his sister was the same. Still, he didn't know exactly how he could help her out with that. What do you need me for? She gave him a smile, and he knew she was going to ask for a big favor. I need a new partner. The hair on the back of Eric's neck prickled with foreboding. This wasn't going to be good. He chuckled, trying to blow it off. I'm a terrible writer. I don't need you to write anything, she said, swallowing another bite of her salad. I need you to pose as my boyfriend. What? The insides of his turkey sandwich plopped down onto his plate from him squeezing the bread so hard. I don't think that's a good idea, Beth. Why not? She finished her salad and wiped her mouth on her napkin. You're a SEAL, so I know that you're smart, capable, and discreet. You're on medical leave, so it's not like there's anywhere else you need to be. And you're friends with my brother, so I'm sure I can trust you. You barely know me, he said, putting the remains of his food down and wiping his hands, his appetite plummeting. His gut had warned him this was a bad idea. He should have listened. And the fact I'm buddies with Heath should be the #1 reason why I say no. Acting like your boyfriend mean we'd have to get closer, and Heath would kill me if I did that. He's like family to me. Beth gave him a pointed stare. My brother never has to know. We put on a show for the outside world and keep our hands to ourselves privately. Think of it like one of your SEAL missions. Undercover intrigue, only with beaches and bathing suits. The thought of Beth in a tiny bikini and nothing else nearly made him swallow his tongue. He took a long swig of his iced tea and watched her over the rim of his glass. She had the same expression Heath got sometimes before a mission, unwavering determination. Eric was in trouble here. Reading the panic he was sure was written all over his face, Beth sighed. Look, I realize this is coming out of the blue for you, but I'm desperate here. If I lose this story, it could damage my career. Well, maybe not damage, but I've been banking on it to give me a boost. There's a promotion opportunity coming up, and I need this to put me ahead of the pack. You could do another story instead, he suggested, but she just shook her head. There's not enough time to dive into something new. I've been focused on this for weeks, and Eric, it's not just about me. I'm chasing this story because I believe it in. I believe that people are being exploited, and I need your help to make it stop. There could be innocent lives at risk. Aren't SEALs sworn to serve and protect? That's the cops, he grumbled. She'd pushed his major button and didn't even know it. Protectiveness was woven into every fiber of his being, thanks to his no-good con artist father and the crap he'd put Eric's mother through growing up. Taking her up on her offer was insanity. But if he didn't agree, would someone else? Perhaps someone not as capable of keeping her safe if she really did uncover something dangerous. The thought of Beth trapped on an island with no one reliable watching her back made his stomach sink. And, in a way, he'd be doing Heath a favor, wouldn't he? Keeping an eye on his little sis while she worked. Please, she said, drawing his focus back to her. I wouldn't ask if I didn't need your help. The tickets and the retreat are already booked. Our flight leaves in the morning. Maybe I'm wrong and there's nothing going on at all. In that case, It'll be a 1-week vacation, all expenses paid. You can't pass that up, right? All you have to do is pretend to be into me and look pretty." He didn't have to pretend to be into her. That was the problem. But given everything else and the importance of this trip, he couldn't say no. It would be hard to keep his hands to himself, but no harder than staying up 36 hours to guard an encampment against the enemy. Plus, it would give him a much-needed change of scenery and get him out of his apartment. "Okay, I'll do it," he said. Her eyes widened in happy surprise as if she'd thought he'd refuse. Thank you so much. You don't know how much this means to me." She asked for his phone number and typed in his digits, then stood to throw away her trash. "I need to get back to the office and tell my editor. Once I get everything situated there, I'll text you with the details. Thanks so much for helping me out." Eric stayed behind at the table to finish his lunch. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Heath telling him his sister was fine and not to worry. Then he stared out at the sunny day and blue skies above, praying he'd made the right choice. Heath buzzed back a response minutes later, thanking Eric for checking in on her. Guilt pinched his chest before he shoved it aside. He was doing this to keep an eye on Beth and help her out of a tough situation. That was all. Before he knew it, it would all be over and he'd be back in his beloved city by the bay, tanned and relaxed, and hopefully with Heath none the wiser. She was right. It was the perfect plan. Well, except for the whole lying to his best friend part. He threw his own trash away and headed back outside, the sun hot on his skin. Now, if he could just get his libido under control when Beth was around, he'd be all set. Chapter 3. The next morning, Beth was waiting in the small terminal of the private airport to meet Eric so they could catch their flight for the Love Fix retreat. After getting Eric's agreement to play her partner on this adventure, she'd returned to the office and made all the arrangements. Her pulse sped and adrenaline pumped through her system. She hadn't been lying when she'd told Eric that this story could be life-changing for her. The bigger news outlets were always on the lookout for the next breakout star, and if Beth could prove her suspicions were true, that Robert Hart and his isolated resort were involved in something shady, then that was pure gold career-wise. She could stop counting every penny, stop dreaming about the day her big break would come, stop worrying about the fact that she was closer now to 30 than 20, and still had nothing to show for her efforts than a desk job in a mid-sized newspaper that had dwindling readership and offered little hope for advancement. Ready to go. Her phone lit up with a message from Layla. "Sure am," she responded, even if she felt a pit in her stomach. So much was riding on this trip. She'd have been nervous going with Jeff, but going with a near stranger intensified everything. "I hope my partner is. SEALs are ready for anything. Trust me on that one." Layla had found happiness with a former SEAL herself, happiness that she absolutely deserved. The two women had met via social media when Beth was writing a story about women becoming empowered and taking control of their lives. As she'd learned about Layla's first husband, who'd been involved in drug and gang violence, and how Beth had found the courage to divorce him and build a better life for herself and her son, she'd been so impressed that it had sparked a genuine friendship. Even though they lived at a distance from each other, they texted often, and Beth considered Layla to be her closest friend. "I'm sure he can handle it. I'm just concerned about spending so much time with someone I don't know." "Is he hot?" Layla asked. She glanced up and caught sight of Eric strolling into the terminal, all long-legged male grace and devastatingly confident attitude. He looked dangerous, and she found herself wondering if he was armed. He probably was. Weren't SEALs supposed to be always prepared for anything? Or was that the Boy Scouts? Just the sight of him was muddling her brain. She tried to shake it off. It didn't matter that he was hot. It didn't even matter if he was armed. This private airport was too fancy to have metal detectors or any screening beyond checking ID. If you could afford to be here, you could bring whatever you wanted. Maybe she should be hoping he was armed. Who knew what they might end up facing at the retreat? She wanted him to have access to whatever he needed to help her get her job done. That was what mattered, not how good he looked. But still, way hot. she admitted in her text to Layla before putting her phone away. Beth cleared the sudden constriction from her throat and stood to wave him over to where she was sitting. "Hi," she said when he reached her. She put her hand on his shoulder and went up on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. She felt him still. He didn't back away, but he didn't embrace her either. "What are you doing?" He kept his voice low. "Playing my part. We're supposed to be a couple. I should look happy to see you, right?" She was happy to see him for a lot of reasons, but maintaining their cover was important. There were probably 30 other couples there at the airport with them, of varying ages, ethnicities, and gender orientations. A good-sized group. Hopefully, she and Eric would be able to blend into the background, drawing no attention as she dug for information. "Got it," Eric said. "Is our greeting done now, or should we go for a real kiss?" That was tempting, but she shook her head to indicate no and gestured to the seats near the windows she'd claimed. A real kiss would be a huge mistake. Huge. Enormous. Off the charts bad, so why was she wondering what it would be like? As he sprawled in the chair next to hers, he looked like he'd walked off the cover of Hot Guys on vacation in his cargo shorts that cupped his taut butt to perfection and form-fitting white t-shirt that showed acres of muscled torso and lickable tanned skin. He also smelled amazing, like soap and citrus and a hint of fabric softener. Of course she was attracted to him. Why wouldn't be? Especially since it had been more than a few months since Beth had been with a guy. But feeling attraction and acting on it were two very different things. She shook off her erotic thoughts about the last man on earth she should sleep with and frowned down at her phone screen instead. "Did you receive all my notes?" "I did," he said, setting his carry-on black duffel on the floor near his feet, then leaning back in his chair to stretch his arm across the back of her seat. The brush of his forearm against her shoulder sent tingles of awareness through her body, and heat sparkled through her blood like wildfire. His next words, though, put a fast damper on that blaze. "But I don't like the plan." Beth sat up straighter, leaning away from his touch. "Well, it's a good thing then that I'm not paying you for your opinion." "You're not paying me at all, sweetheart." He gave her a slow grin that made her toes curl in her strappy sandals. "Even so, I don't like using my real-life details on this trip, especially since we're using fake names. It'll be easier to stay in character if there are clear lines between what's real and what's not." He had a point, but it seemed to her that sticking close to the truth would be simpler, easier to remember, less chance of slipping up. There wasn't enough time for Eric to learn all the intricate details of the fake life she and Jeff had put in place. They'd had weeks to learn their cover. She and Eric had... Beth checked her watch. 20 minutes until takeoff. Crap. Eric was watching her, his too perceptive gaze narrowed, and part of her wanted to call the whole thing off. She needed a partner she could work with, not someone who was going to challenge her on every point. But this story meant so much to her, and she couldn't stomach the thought of waiting another 6 months before getting a chance to figure out what was going on. Someone was going to have to give a little, and if it wouldn't be Eric, then it would have to be her. She took a deep breath and forced a polite smile she didn't feel. "What would you suggest?" He gave a one-shoulder shrug, then winced slightly, rubbing his left side. "I say we agree now to a quick cover story. Something that's close enough to our own truth that we won't get tripped up if people ask us about it, but different enough that we're protected." "Okay. Like what?" Beth shifted slightly to look at him. "How about we swap a few things? I'll be the workaholic writer, and you can be a wife who's just returned home from the service. Maybe while you were overseas, I got lonely and had an affair. Despite our troubles, we still love each other and want to try to work things out. That's why we're going to this retreat." A little cliché, but not bad, actually. She blinked at him a moment. She could fill him in on details for his writer life cover, and she had decent knowledge about the military from her research at work and from talking with her brother Heath. "I like the workaholic part. How about you put your career ahead of everything else now, including our marriage? Oh, and speaking of marriage." She pulled a baggie from her pocket after taking a quick glance around to make sure no one was watching them. "You'll need this." He stared down at her outstretched hand. "What's that?" "Your wedding ring," she said. She took his hand, feeling the warmth and strength in it, and slid the simple platinum band onto his finger. Hers was platinum too, but with a diamond solitary set on top. The stone glittered up at her beneath the overhead lights, and even though this whole thing was totally a lie and the sparkling thing was a rhinestone, it suddenly felt all too real. For the next week at least, she and Eric would be playing husband and wife. A frisson of excitement fluttered through her before she tamped it down. "See? I have one too, necessary for our cover." This was all play acting, putting on a show to fool the resort staff and the other couples, and that was it. The more she reminded herself of that, the better. Besides, she hadn't been interested in anything like a white dress wedding or a happily ever after for a long time now. Her career was her priority, not her love life. Unexpectedly, Eric captured her hand in his, then raised it to his mouth to kiss the backs of her fingers. Mesmerized, all Beth could do was stare at him, his eyes warm with amusement and his breath hot on her skin as he grinned. "Best start letting these people think I can't keep my hands off you, right, sweetheart?" Cheeks flaming, Beth swallowed hard and searched for her words. She'd been the one to start this by greeting him with a kiss. Heck, by suggesting he join her at all on this trip. She had to be willing and ready to play her part. And that meant not blushing like a 13-year-old with a crush whenever Eric touched her. She had to respond, had to show that she could take this in stride. She was opening her mouth just as she was interrupted by the intercom. "Thank you for your patience. We are ready to begin boarding. Please gather your belongings and form an orderly line at the gate." She pulled away from him fast. "We should get in line." She rose and put her laptop bag over her shoulder. It was a kind of armor for her and gave her the strength to say what she needed to. "Remember not to get too carried away. We're supposed to be a couple having problems, right? But we're working on our marriage," he reminded her. "One of my faults is that I haven't paid enough attention to you, so I'd be trying to make up for that, right?" Okay, she had to admit that that made sense, but that didn't mean he should be making overly romantic gestures all the time. If he did, it would get really difficult to keep that line drawn between real and fake. True, but let's not forget, this is all pretend, even if a tiny part of her didn't want it to be. Chapter 4. Eric stared out the window of the cabin beside him and sipped his frou-frou tropical drink. They'd been on the packed private jet for nearly 7 hours now, and under normal circumstances, he'd have been climbing the walls. Small spaces weren't his forte. They made him feel trapped. And while flying didn't usually bother him, the smaller confines of the private jet combined with their full group of couples made this trip a bit too close for his comfort. Still, being with Beth calmed him for some reason. Then again, it could be the alcohol in these drinks too. He had no idea what exactly went into making an Ipanema explosion, but it tasted like rum and coconut and paradise. And after 3 of them, he didn't much care about anything at all. "You doing all right, dear?" Beth asked him, looking up from her laptop screen. She'd spent most of the flight working while he'd napped, or watched the in-flight movie on the screen in the back of the seat in front of him. "Just fine, sweetheart," he responded. He'd suggest 2 hours earlier that she put her laptop away since he was supposed to be the one of them who was a workaholic. But she'd insisted that no one could see her screen. If anyone asked, she planned to tell them she was reading a training manual for her next deployment. He tried to picture her in the service and failed. She was tough enough, she was disciplined, and he didn't doubt her courage or resolve. But something about her attitude suggested she wouldn't be great at taking orders. She gave him a side glance, then continued clacking those keys of hers on her computer. "Want me to have the attendant bring you another of those fruity drinks?" He snorted, amused. The irony of their positions was not lost on him. He was used to being the man in charge, a tough-as-nails alpha who commanded respect and led the pack on his SEAL team. But for the sake of her story, he'd let these people on the plane with them think whatever they wanted. He was here to protect Beth. And if that meant laying low and playing her husband, then so be it. Ladies and gentlemen, please stow away any electronic devices and secure your trays in their upright position as we prepare for our final descent to the island. An attendant in a crisp blue uniform said. Thank you. Beth did as he'd asked, and Eric straightened in his seat, watching her as she tucked her laptop away in the tote she'd slid beneath the seat in front of her. He'd thought she'd looked hot in her office attire the day before, with her form-fitting black pants and bright turquoise top. But man, oh man, she looked downright gorgeous today. Those long tanned legs of hers displayed to perfection by her white shorts and the way that navy and white striped top she wore outlined her curves ought to be illegal in all 50 states. He had to stare out the window again to get his body back under control. This was ridiculous. He was only here to help her out, and to make sure she didn't get into any trouble, per his promise to his buddy. Heath would have a cow if Eric so much as laid an inappropriate finger on his little sister. Not to mention the fact that Eric didn't do relationships, and Beth had "deserves better than no strings attached" written all over her. He sighed and leaned back in his seat, shutting his eyes until he felt the bump and jolt of their smooth landing. Soon, they'd taxied to their gate at the small airport, and passengers began to buzz around the cabin, gathering their things to disembark. Eric helped Beth get her bag down from the overhead bin, then grabbed his duffel before following her down the aisle and out onto the tarmac. No air bridge leading to a terminal here on the island, just warm breezes and blue skies as far as the eye could see. Taking a deep breath, he felt some of his restless tension dissipate. Maybe coming here had been a good idea, even if it was all a ruse. The air smelled of warm sand and sea, and the sound of palm trees rustling in the wind soothed something in him that had been restless since his injury. He didn't deal well with vacation under normal circumstances because he got too anxious for something to do. This might be the perfect compromise, a working vacation. "Welcome to our Love Fix retreat," a tanned older man with white hair and even whiter teeth said. From the information Beth had sent him last night about this place, he recognized the guy as Robert Hart, owner and founder of the company Beth was investigating. The fact she'd tensed slightly beside him was also a clue. Without thinking, he slid his arm around her waist and tugged her into his side while other couples crowded around them. She stiffened slightly at his touch, then relaxed against him. Hey, they were supposed to be married, right? It was all part of their cover. That's the excuse he was going with anyway. The breeze blew a strand of her hair into his face, and he brushed it aside, catching a hint of her rose-scented shampoo before concentrating on Hart's speech. "We're so excited to have you all here. For the next week, we'll be getting to know each other a whole lot better, and hopefully, we'll be able to help you and your partner return to the loving partnership you all crave. First, though, let's get you all checked in. Follow me, please." They walked down a path alongside the airport and around a large hangar, emerging to see a real-life Shangri-La. 4 large thatched-roofed buildings stood clustered together on the ridge of a hill leading down to the clear blue waters of the sea. Private bungalows lined the beach, one for each couple, connected to land by a long boardwalk. Lush tropical foliage and flowers glistened beneath the sun in all directions, and the sweet scent of jasmine perfumed the air as they walked to the registration desk inside one of the larger buildings. So far, there wasn't anything out of the ordinary that Eric could see, unless you counted all the signs hyping their Wi-Fi service. Seriously, you'd think the internet had been invented on the island the way they bragged about how fast their connection speed was and how easy it was to use. If he'd been in charge, Eric would have bragged about the gorgeous white sand beaches, but to each his own, he supposed. And maybe they felt they needed to play up the Wi-Fi, since from what he'd heard, cell signals out here were very hit or miss. All those CEO types probably got hives if they were out of contact with the office for more than an hour or so. While he and Beth waited in line, Eric couldn't help glancing around the lobby. From the soaring cathedral-like ceilings to the cool tile floors, the place screamed expensive. Rattan furniture covered with plump cushions was scattered around the space, and several cages with brightly colored parrots stood against the walls, Off to one side, he noted a door standing slightly ajar. "Honey, if you can handle our reservations, I'm going to explore a bit." He nudged Beth with his arm and hiked his chin in that direction. Beth's eyes followed where he indicated. She gave a slight nod. "I've got this." He made his way over to the door, checking around him periodically to make sure no one was watching him. But the rest of the couples were too busy checking in and getting to know one another to notice him. He slipped behind a strategically placed potted fern, then peered through the open door into the room beyond. He spotted a row of computers and thought it must be a business center. But the more he looked around, the more he questioned that conclusion. There were a lot of computers, plus sizable server banks, as if this place was set up to process massive amounts of information. But why would that be? This was a therapy retreat, not a business hub. Plus, the setup seemed very utilitarian. None of the lush elegance that he'd seen so far in all the public areas. It almost seemed as if this room wasn't meant for the guests at all. But why would the resort need a computer center like this for the staff? "May I help you, sir?" one of the resort staff members said from behind him, and Eric turned to find a guy who looked maybe 20 or so, dressed in the requisite uniform of white polo shirt and black Bermuda shorts standing behind him. The guy's smile was polite enough, but it didn't reach his dark eyes. "Oh, sorry," Eric said, playing the part of contrite tourist. "Just checking out this place. It's really fantastic." "Thank you, sir," the guy said, gesturing for Eric to follow him back to the reception area. When they were through the door, the staffer closed and locked it. "This room is for staff only, I'm afraid," the man continued. "Please enjoy your stay here on the island." Eric stared after him for a minute before turning his attention to where Beth and the other new arrivals were gathered. Other employees were smiling widely and handing out gift bags, lees, and more fruity drinks. Eric rejoined Beth, putting his arm around her and leaning close to her ear. "Something suspicious over there," he whispered and gave her a quick description of the equipment in the room. He smiled at a staffer who brought him a flowered lei and a fourth fruity drink. "When in Rome, eh?" He sipped the concoction and gazed at the other people in the room. "That is weird," Beth said with a glance toward the door. "Why on earth would they need that kind of setup?" He shrugged again, careful not to disturb his aching shoulder this time. "Something else to check out while we're here. We've arranged for private dinners in your bungalows this evening so that you can get settled and have some private time to yourselves," Hart announced. "Feel free to explore the resort as much as you'd like, but make sure to relax and get plenty of rest tonight. The work of rebuilding your relationship starts tomorrow." With that, they were dismissed to their bungalows, where they found their luggage already waiting for them. "Someplace," Eric commented to himself, standing at the door that led to a small veranda with a view of the water. The bungalow was as luxurious as everything else. The living room behind him had plush furniture and a kitchenette in one corner. Down the hall was the bedroom with a king-sized bed done up in fluffy white material. Beth was currently hanging her clothing in the closet and talking to someone on the phone. Maybe they'd lucked out and their bungalow was in a good spot for a phone signal. "Checking in with your editor?" he asked when she returned to the living room. She'd changed into a yellow sundress. It covered more of her body than the shorts, but it was definitely sexier. "Oh no, just a friend. Trying to, anyway. Our call dropped after a minute." The mention of a friend pulled him up short, and he raised an eyebrow, realizing that he hadn't asked if she was unattached. He'd assumed she was, and Heath had never mentioned that his sister was involved with someone, but he didn't know that. "Should I be jealous?" he teased. "A girlfriend of mine. I promised to keep her updated on our trip," Beth explained. "It's lovely, isn't it?" She walked around the room. "Kind of a shame that all this glamour is covering up something shady." "Guess so. We might as well enjoy some of what it has to offer while you investigate." She looked conflicted for a second, but then shrugged. "I guess you're right. But speaking of our glamorous accommodations, we need to establish some ground rules for sharing this space." She suddenly seemed nervous. "I think you should take the bed since you're still recovering from your injury." I can sleep on the couch. Not happening. You take the bedroom. I'll camp out here, he said. Trust me when I say it's far nicer than lots of places that I've slept. I'm sure it is, but I'm not debating this with you, Beth, he said. My mother raised me better than to let a lady sleep on a sofa when there was a bed available. Your mother told you what the bedroom arrangements should be when going undercover, while injured, with a woman you barely know? She asked with a little smirk. I don't remember that etiquette lesson. Your mom must have been a regular Emily Post. Okay, so maybe this exact situation never came up when she was telling me how to behave, Eric admitted. But I know what she'd expect of me. She always says that being kind is something anyone can afford. At times, his mother had been too kind, too self-deprecating, which allowed his father to take advantage of her. But his father was a jerk who knew nothing of kindness or how to treat people. Eric refused to be like him. Sounds like a nice motherly thing to say. She plumped a pillow on the couch before sitting down and reaching for her laptop on the coffee table. Our dinner is supposed to be delivered in about an hour. I'm going to get some work done until it comes. I'll be on the deck, he said. As always, the sea was calling to him. Part of the reason he'd gone into the Navy was so he could be around the water constantly. Okay. She looked at him and passed him to the stunning view, her expression a little wistful, like maybe she wanted to be out there with him. A second later, she gave her head a little shake. Enjoy. He glanced back at her as he stepped out the door. Her fingers were already moving over the keyboard and her attention was fully fixed on the screen. If he really was her husband, he'd do about anything to focus her attention on him. But she wasn't, and he wasn't the relationship type. So he focused on other matters, like how he was going to keep her safe in a bungalow with minimal security features. He reminded himself that that was what he should be worried about, not how beautiful she looked in that yellow dress. Chapter 5. The next morning, Beth was up early and raring to get started. The private bungalow she and Eric were staying in was comfy enough, and the sound of the waves rippling beneath the elevated floor of their lodgings was oddly soothing. She'd slept like the dead, in other words. Eric was still snoozing away on the sofa when she came out of the bathroom and tiptoed back to the bedroom to get dressed. She wasn't used to having a roommate these days, and it hadn't occurred to her to take them into the bathroom with her, until she'd emerged from her shower with nothing to put on except her towel. That was awkward, though not as awkward as their conversation the night before about sleeping arrangements. She'd tried a few more times to get him to reconsider taking the bed, but he hadn't budged, and finally, she'd given in and let the topic drop. Over dinner, they'd talked a little more about the details of their cover story. Conversation had been pleasant and had flowed easily between them. But she'd kept her laptop handy throughout the meal as a clear sign that it wasn't a romantic dinner. She was keeping herself in business mode as much as possible and still playing her part. Right now, that meant dressing to look the way everyone would expect. She slipped on a pink bikini, but covered it up with a black linen jumpsuit. She finally woke him up after ordering their room service breakfast and checked her email while he took his shower. It was weird that there were so many signs about the Wi-Fi, but the connection really was top-notch, even here in the tastefully decorated bungalow. She had to appreciate the efficiency since she was able to breeze through her emails in no time at all. Beth sat at the small table in the living room, doing her best to concentrate on her work and not on the sounds of Eric bumping around in the bathroom or his soft hums as he shaved. But each time she closed her eyes, all she could picture was him with a wet towel slung around his hips and water trickling down his smooth skin. What she wouldn't give to lick those droplets off, taste the salt and heat of him, kiss every square inch of... "Breakfast here yet?" he said, coming out of the bedroom wearing a clean pair of cargo shorts and a black t-shirt with a surf logo on the front. He padded over barefoot to the small kitchenette and poured himself a cup of coffee. "I'm starving. Should be here any minute." She checked her watch to keep from staring at him. Why did her have to be so attractive? "We'll have to hurry, though. We've got our first group therapy session in half an hour in the main building." "Group therapy?" Eric scrunched his nose. Seriously? Seriously." Beth closed her laptop and turned in her seat to face him. It would be too suspicious if we didn't participate. We're supposed to be here to fix our troubled marriage, remember? Yeah, but I doubt anything on offer here would really help anyone. Someone claiming they can fix all your problems in just 1 week? I'm all for therapy, but that part sounds like a scam. It was the most cynical thing she'd ever heard him say. She was about to ask where his attitude came from when a knock sounded on the door. Beth got up and let the room service guy in to deliver their breakfast, then tipped him on his way out. They settled in for a quick meal of croissants and fresh tropical fruits. So, what's your problem with therapy? I don't have a problem with therapy. I do have a big problem with things that sound too good to be true, he said around a bite of mango. I grew up around a con man, and I've seen how they operate firsthand. I like to think I can smell BS a mile away. She nibbled on a buttery croissant, the flaky dough melting on her tongue. Sounds like whoever it was did a real number on you. Yep. He finished off his fruit, then took a long swig of coffee. My dad was a piece of work, all right. Your dad? His dad had been a con man. That had to leave a person with some serious scars and trust issues. Her family's overprotectiveness was annoying at times, but she knew how lucky she was to have grown up in a stable, loving environment with parents who encouraged her and a brother who had her back. Learning that Eric's childhood hadn't had that security gave her some insight into him. It might explain why such a handsome guy was still single at his age if he still struggled to trust others. Eric checked his watch. We should get going. She wanted to ask him more about his father, but if they didn't get to that group session, their cover could be blown before they'd even started investigating. She quickly downed the rest of her croissant, then grabbed her tote. When she took Eric's hand as they walked up the boardwalk to the short path to the main building, she felt him tense. He glanced down at her, but he'd put on his sunglasses and she couldn't see his eyes. Was he regretting that he'd revealed too much? Or was the tension a sign of nervousness about the roles they were about to play? As always, she had questions. It was one of the career hazards of being a reporter, but this was her partner, not an interview subject. They needed to be a united front so she could nail this story. So for now, she had to focus her inquisitive brain on what was going on at the retreat. By the time they arrived at the session, the other couples were already assembled in a circle. Beth and Eric took their places, and soon Robert Hart entered the room to preside. They went around the room and each person introduced themselves and talked a bit about why they were there. In her head, Beth went over their story again. She'd been enlisted in the army, sent overseas for 3 years, and while she'd been gone, Eric had turned into a workaholic and been unfaithful. But they still loved each other and wanted to try to fix their marriage. And then I came home from work earlier one day and found him sleeping with my best friend, another woman in their group said. Crap. She'd missed the first part of what the other woman had said, but it sounded way too close to the backstory she and Eric had concocted. Beth glanced at him beside her, and he gave her a small shake of his head, telling her not to worry, but she was worried already. And you, Robert Hart said, looking at Beth, then checking his clipboard. Mrs. Holman, please introduce yourself and tell us why you're here. Beth swallowed hard and stared around at all the other guests watching her. They needed something to make their story more unique, so it wasn't quite so similar to the other couples. Scrambling, she pulled out the first thing that came to her mind. Hi, my name's Beth Holman, and this is my husband, Eric. We're here because while I was away serving in the military overseas, he had an affair. He's a writer, and I know creatives can be flighty sometimes, but I think there's something more at play here. His father was a con man, and he's got serious trust issues he needs to work out because of that. We still love each other and want to fix our marriage, but there's no way we can move forward until he deals with his past. Isn't that right, honey? She looked back at Eric over her shoulder, only to see him looking like he'd swallowed a cue ball. Dark eyes wide and full of shocked anger. His tanned cheeks were slightly mottled with crimson. She'd been trying to make their story unique so it would be more believable, but she'd overstepped his boundaries, obviously. Hoping to ease the sting, she placed her hand on his knee and gave him a conciliatory smile. I'm sorry to have put it all out there like that, but he needs to know what's going on so he can help us. Eric blinked at her a few times, His full lips compressed into a thin white line. Then he inhaled slow and exhaled even slower, a tiny muscle ticking near his tight jaw as he spoke. "Yes, that's true, sweetheart." The edge in his tone had the endearment cutting deeper than a razor blade. "But my past isn't up for discussion." "Ah, a sore spot," Robert Hart said, his bright blue eyes zeroing in on Eric like laser beams. "We like to poke at those around here, Eric. But don't worry. You're in safe hands with me. Before you leave here, we'll work out all your kinks." Beth glanced back at the older man, unsettled by his strange choice of words, but then refocused on Eric again, doing her best to convey her sincere apology without words. Crap, crap, crap. She was used to following her gut and jumping into action when she was on a story, but she wasn't the only one involved in this, and she hadn't realized how much her words might hurt Eric. The rest of the session passed in a blur as she counted the seconds until they could talk privately again so she could apologize properly. The moment the session let out, Eric left the room, striding ahead of her. Beth raced after him down the path to their bungalow, her stomach tied in knots. "I'm really sorry about what I said back there. I didn't mean to share your secret with the world, but I panicked, and I tend to babble when I'm nervous and—" He stopped so abruptly in front of her on the boardwalk that she nearly barreled right into his back. Eric turned to face her, his hands resting on her shoulders to steady her and keep her from toppling over into the water. "It's fine, I get it. But no more surprises, okay? Anything we say to each other in private is in strict confidence, got it?" She nodded and stared up at him. A lock of his blonde hair had fallen over his forehead, and her fingertips itched to reach up and brush it back into place for him. She clenched her hands at her sides instead, knowing that touching him now wouldn't help anything. "Got it." Chapter 6. Eric strode around the bungalow, grumbling to himself about that stupid therapy session. Sure, he'd seen it mentioned on the brochure Beth had sent him about this idiotic retreat, but he'd figure he could bluff his way through it, keeping his secrets just that, secret. Would have worked too if she'd stuck to the cover they'd agreed on. But no, she had to go and add on to it, blabbing to Robert Hart and anyone else within hearing distance about his dad. He'd regretted letting that slip earlier at breakfast, and now he regretted it even more. He never talked about his old man. Never. What had possessed him to come out with it this morning was beyond him. But there was something about Beth. A familiarity, maybe, because of her brother. But no, he had never opened up to Heath like that. For some reason, he just felt at ease around Beth in a way that made him far too prone to letting his defenses drop, which was beyond crazy since he'd known her all of 24 hours. And sure, she had the face of an angel and a body made for sin. But he was a trained sailor, a frigging Navy SEAL, for Pete's sake. He'd faced down some of the cleverest, most vicious, most vile dictators on Earth. He should be able to keep his crap together around one beautiful woman. He walked into the bathroom to change into his swim trunks, then came out and grabbed a beach towel from the shelf by the door. According to the itinerary, they had the afternoon free before attending some dinner/reception thing tonight. Eric intended to spend his time alone, clearing his mind and getting his head around the fact they still had the rest of the week to get through before this was over. He'd just stepped out onto the veranda outside when a knock sounded at the front door. Beth, who'd been steering clear of him since their return to the room, answered it. Their visitors were the couple from their therapy session earlier, the ones who'd had a story similar to theirs. Eric felt his beach time slipping away as Beth turned slightly to give him a get-your-butt-over-here look. The temptation to turn and run was strong, but Eric had never backed down from a challenge before in his life, and he wouldn't start now. Besides, this is what he'd signed on for yesterday, playing the role of devoted partner. Fine. He tossed his towel aside and walked over to slip his arm around Beth's waist, forcing a cheerful smile he didn't quite feel. One doting husband coming up. "Hey guys," he greeted the visitors. "I remember you from the group this morning. Eric Holman." "John Murphy," the guy said, shaking Eric's hand. "And this is my wife, Cindy." "Nice to meet you," Eric said. "What can we help you with today?" "They invited us to play ping-pong with them," Beth said, glancing up at him, her smile tight and her fingers warm against his bare torso. I think we should take them up on their offer. It'll give us a chance to explore the rec room, since we've not seen it yet. The reminder of her job here helped get him back on track. Eric nodded, then squeezed Beth close for a second, biting back a grin as she tensed. Apparently, she was still stuck on their disagreement earlier, same as he'd been. But with his years of training, he was able to rebound and compartmentalize those feeling quicker than she could. Good to know. He laid the affection on extra thick, partly for payback from her blabbing about his past earlier without clearing it with him first, and partly because it was fun to see her flustered and discombobulated. She'd come off as so in control when they'd met that it was fun getting a peek at the fallible woman beneath her stylish, slick exterior. And part of him liked being close to her. That was the part with the potential to cause him the most trouble. Okay, sure, sweetheart. Whatever you want. Before she could react, he bent and dropped a quick kiss on her lips. She tasted of sugar from the fruit earlier and mint from her toothpaste, and this time, when he smiled, it was genuine. This trip is all about you, darling. I'm just here to beg forgiveness. Plus, it will give me a chance to show off my superior ping-pong skills. Let me just put a shirt on. While Beth blinked at him, her expression stunned. He hurried into the bedroom and grabbed a clean t-shirt from his duffel, tugging it on over his head before shoving his feet into a pair of flip-flops and rejoining their group by the door. The walk to the rec room, located in one of the other large bungalows next door to the main building, helped Eric walk off some of his stress from earlier and brighten his outlook on things. Hey, it was a week in paradise. All he had to do was keep his mouth shut about his past and keep his hands to himself, mostly. And he'd be all set. Easy enough. Beth took his arm and held him back slightly on the path as the other couple walked on ahead, then whispered, "What was that back there?" "What?" Eric intentionally frowned down at her to keep himself from smiling. He knew exactly what she was asking about. You know what? She glanced over to make sure the Murphys weren't watching them. "The kiss. Liked it, huh?" He chuckled. "I've been told I'm pretty good at it." "Don't flatter yourself. Anyway, that's not the point." She scowled. "We should clear any physical stuff between us beforehand. You kissed me at the airport yesterday." And that had shocked him. So he got how she was feeling. "On the cheek," she squeaked. "It's not the same. Look." He turned toward her, bringing them to a stop on the path. He kept his voice low and leaned close enough that her scent washed over him. "We're supposed to be married. I think people would be suspicious if we didn't touch or kiss once in a while, right?" The breeze caught her dark ponytail and set it dancing. "I figured you'd want to keep all this on the down low as much as possible." "Sorry." She huffed and shook her head. "You're right. I'm sorry too. I'm just on edge, and it's making me jumpy. I really want to start digging into what's going on here, and this is my first shot. Let's make the most of it then." They started moving again and entered the huge open-air rec room. "I should probably warn you that I played competitive ping-pong in college," she said softly. "I'm good." "Yeah?" Eric gazed around at the high-thatched ceiling above and the various game tables and activities set up around the space, then grinned at her. "I'm good too. I look forward to winning." "In your dreams, honey," she said, before running over to join Cindy on one side of the ping-pong table. "Come on, Hubs, you chicken or what?" "Hubs." Eric shook his head and picked up a paddle, moving in beside John on the opposite side of the table. Apparently, they were playing gender teams instead of as couples. "Just giving you ladies a moment to savor the hope of victory before I crush you in defeat. Isn't that right, John?" "Oh, well." John gave his wife a nervous look before smiling. "We're just playing for fun." "Sure, I'm all about fun," he said, before serving the first volley over the net. Beth returned the shot, and the game was on. As they played, Eric tried to engage John in conversation when he could. "So, is this your first retreat?" "Yeah, we've been here a few weeks already, though. Came early to relax and center our chakras." Eric narrowly avoided rolling his eyes, but managed a friendly grin all the same. "I didn't know they let you come early." "It costs extra, of course. John said, stepping back as Beth sent a blistering shot into the guy's quarter of the table. A resounding whoop went up from the ladies' side at the miss. "Point for our side," Beth said, her expression smug. "I believe that makes the score 1-0 in our favor." "Enjoy it while it lasts, sweetheart," Eric said, crouching slightly and bouncing on the balls of his feet. "You're about to go down, big time." The double entendre of his words stuck him before he quickly pushed it aside. Thoughts of Beth on her knees before him, undoing his belt and zipper, had his blood thundering. "Ha!" Beth yelled, clapping excitedly as the ball whizzed past him to land across the rec room. "Another point for us. I think you're the one going down, big boy." And man, oh man, those thoughts were even steamier. Kissing his way down her luscious body, parting her thighs. "Need help finding that ball, man?" John asked, joining Eric in the search for the tiny white ping-pong ball. Eric raised a hand to him in thanks, then bent to search underneath a foosball table. It had to be over here somewhere. Perhaps he could find his missing common sense along with it. What was wrong with him? He was here on a job. It was another mission just like any other. He shouldn't be thinking about Beth or anything else except the swift completion of his goals. But just that little kiss had given him a taste. No, not going there. Get in, get the intel she needed for her story. Get out. Now, if he could just get his traitorous dick to calm down, that'd be awesome. It had been too long since he'd gotten laid. That had to be it. Thankfully, his t-shirt was long and loose enough that it covered his crotch and any signs of his arousal. "Got it," John called, holding up the ball, and they got back to the game. Beth was good. He'd give her that, but he was no slouch himself, even though he'd missed a few shots at the beginning. Play continued until they ended it all in a tie, neither side conceding defeat. "Well, that was fun," Beth said, taking Eric's hand and leading the group over to a seating area in the middle of the rec room. The place was empty except for the four of them, making for ideal talking. She slumped down into the corner of a rattan sectional sofa and tucked her feet beneath her while Eric took a seat beside her and slung his arm along the back of the cushion. His body was back under control at last, allowing him to concentrate on the conversation. "And relaxing." "Yep," Eric said, feeding her the information he'd gleaned from John earlier. "Did you know they let some couples come to these retreats early, sweetheart?" "Really? No, I didn't know that." Beth turned to Cindy and John, who were sitting across from them. "Is that what you guys did?" "Yeah," Cindy smiled. "It's been great here. We weren't certain at first, after another couple who arrived at the same time we did left early because of a bad experience." "Bad experience?" Eric asked, frowning. "This is paradise. How could anything go wrong?" "Not sure," John said. "But we talked to them before they left, and the D'Angelos were definitely not happy with their love fix experience." "D'Angelo?" Beth straightened slightly. "I recognize that name from the website. They posted a review. A very positive review of their experience at the retreat." "Positive?" Cindy and John exchanged a look. "That's weird, because when I spoke to them, they couldn't get away from the island fast enough." "Huh." Eric and Beth glanced at each other, his BS meter reading off the charts. "That is weird. Well, we should probably get back to our bungalow," Beth said, taking Eric's hand to tug him to his feet beside her. "I want to take a shower and have some downtime before the reception tonight." "Us too," John said, standing along with Cindy. "It was great playing with you two. Maybe we can do it again sometime." "Sounds awesome," Eric said, waving as the other couple walked out. He waited until they were alone again before saying, "So, a first-hand report of bogus reviews and unsatisfied guests. Maybe you're onto something fishy here at the retreat after all." "Oh, I know I am," Beth said, keeping hold of his hand and leading him out of the rec room. "Let's get back to our room so I can do some snooping into this D'Angelo couple. I've got a feeling about this." "Like spidey senses?" he asked. "He has the same sensation." "Exactly like that. Come on." She tugged on his hand and he let her lead them away. Chapter 7. How do I look? Beth asked as she stepped from the master bathroom in their bungalow later that night. She wasn't used to getting all gussied up, and while it was nice to have an occasion like the formal welcome reception at the resort to warrant looking like a fairy tale princess, most days she felt far more comfortable dressing in comfortable slacks and t-shirts. But given the average income of the typical guest at the retreat, she'd imagine everyone else was accustomed to formal events and the clothes they required. She needed to be able to fit in. She smoothed a hand down the front of her turquoise blue halter-style gown and took a deep breath before stepping into the living room where Eric waited. "Is it too much? 'Cause if it is, I can try to find something else. I brought a black skirt that I can—" Her voice trailed off as he turned to face her, looking so hot in his tux. It was getting harder not to jump his bones by the minute. Eric gave her a slow appraisal from across the room, the movement of his heated gaze up her body sending tingles of sexual awareness through her bloodstream like a physical caress. By the time he met her eyes again, his expression was suitably impressed, and she vowed to wear this dress every day around Eric from now on. She patted the back of her hair where she'd coiled it into a neat chignon, then fiddled with the sparkly necklace around her neck. The matching earrings dangled from her earlobes, and though they were only rhinestones, she lived on a reporter's salary after all. She'd liked the Art Deco style of them when she'd seen them in the store the day she'd bought the gown, and she thought they suited her well. Pretty and delicate, but still bold and deceptively strong. "You look—" Eric moved closer, the spicy scent of his aftershave increasing the odd buzz of giddiness inside her. "Wow, you look amazing, Beth." "Thanks." Heat prickled her cheeks and she swallowed hard. Gorgeous as the man was, she needed to keep her wits about her and keep her hands to herself. It was bad enough that the play acting they'd been doing as a fake couple was feeding right into all the fantasies she'd ever had. Even that one kiss had set a spark through her that refused to be extinguished. She liked his fingers grasped around hers, the brush of his body, the way his shirts molded to his physique. It all led her to imagine more between them, so much more. And part of her thought, why not? They were both unattached. Could they have a fling while at the retreat? Would it really do any harm? Maybe it would even help. Surely she wouldn't be so aware of him all the time if they were able to work through some of their sexual tension directly. She could picture it too clearly, and it made her squirm. She shook off those erotic thoughts and turned away to take a sip from her bottled water on the table against the wall. "Are you ready to go?" "Ready as I'll ever be." He finished off his drink, a tumbler filled with 2 fingers' worth of amber liquid. Her gaze tracked the lithe muscles of his tanned throat, working while he swallowed, then drifted to his broad, muscled chest beneath the starched white cotton of his tuxedo shirt and lower to the waistband of his black trousers. She'd gotten a pretty good idea of what lay beneath those pants earlier when he'd had those board shorts on, and Eric was a well-portioned guy in all aspects. "Come on, sweetheart, let's do this thing." Eric set his glass aside and placed his hand on her lower back to guide her toward the door. Goosebumps rose over her skin as she grabbed her bag, and they headed outside onto the boardwalk. The evening was warm with a slight breeze blowing in off the water. The last traces of the pinks and golds of the sunset lingered near the horizon, and the first glittering stars were twinkling overhead as twilight descended. It would have been a romantic dream come true, if this were a real date and they were in a real relationship, which they weren't. This was all for work, for show. She couldn't let herself forget that. They reached the path leading up the beach to the main building complex where the reception was being held. Several of the other couples from their earlier therapy session passed them on the way, waving in greeting. She tried to find the Murphys but saw no sign of them. Maybe they were inside already. She'd spent the afternoon looking into the D'Angelos and snapping photos around the resort, but so far she hadn't turned up much. She'd left her laptop running a couple of searches, hoping that maybe by the time she and Eric got back tonight they might uncover something more. Entering the grand ballroom, which was decorated like a cross between a luau and Mardi Gras, Beth found it festive, except for the fact every open space on the walls and even the centerpieces at the tables were once again touting the resort's free Wi-Fi service. That was weird. "What is up with that anyway?" Beth asked Eric, hiking her chin toward the nearest sign. "You'd think they own stock in browser software or something." Eric snorted. "Yeah, it seems a bit much, doesn't it? I thought the point of a retreat was so you could unwind and relax and disconnect. But the way they're advertising it seems they want the exact opposite, huh?" Beth's instincts perked up at that, and she stopped a passing staff member with a tray of frou-frou drinks. After taking one for her and Eric, she tried to ask the server about it. "What's with the Wi-Fi around here? Everywhere I turn, there's a sign for it." The staffer's friendly smile quickly dissolved into a displeased frown. "We pride ourselves on having the best amenities of any resort in the area, and that includes our Wi-Fi. We want our guests to know what we have to offer. Excuse me." He turned and left, giving her the cold shoulder, and Beth glanced back at Eric to find him watching the guy depart with a raised brow. "That went well," he said, his tone sarcastic. "Not suspicious or anything." "No, not at all. I wonder. You said that room that you found had servers and computer terminals in it, right?" Her mind played with the idea that the resort was engaging in identity theft to steal guests' credit card numbers or hack into their bank accounts, but wouldn't someone have reported that? All of the reviews were super positive. Too positive and also too similar, which was what had initially caught her attention. "That's what I saw," Eric confirmed. "We may need to take a second look, but it'll be tricky getting in there." She'd intentionally walked past the room several times when she'd been out taking photographs of the resort. There was always a staff member located near the door. Were they guards of some kind? It was something to consider. Part of her wanted to go investigate right then, but if they left the reception dinner, their absence might be noticed. They needed to blend in, so they might as well enjoy the party. She sipped her rum and pineapple-flavored drink. Chunks of fruit speared on brightly colored plastic toothpicks stuck out of the top of the coconut glass, making it hard to find a spot to drink from. Eric solved the problem by eating the fruit first, then tossing all the toothpicks aside to drain his drink in one long swallow. "Clever approach," she said, and pulled the fruit from her drink as well so she could take a big gulp. "Part of my training. Resourcefulness and problem-solving." He grinned at her. A calypso band struck up a fun tropical-inspired pop song in the far corner, and couples started to gather on the dance floor. She had an impulse to move as the beat picked up. "Care to dance?" He grinned at her. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not sure I've had enough alcohol for that yet." Beth held out her hand to him. "Let's find out." He hesitated for the briefest of moments before wrapping his hand around hers and leading her to the dance floor. It might not be a real date, but that didn't mean they couldn't still have fun together. Plus, maybe they could mingle a bit more and get to know some of the other couples at the retreat better. Work and play combined. Eric couldn't remember the last time he'd danced. Maybe that time in Dubai, when his SEAL team had been between missions and they'd all gone to that nightclub. He'd not been lying about the alcohol part either. While he excelled at most sports and considered himself a pretty coordinated guy, dancing was a whole different skill set, one usually to be avoided while sober. They wove through the couples on the dance floor, Beth's hand warm in his, until she found a spot near the band and turned to face him. The music was lively and quick, and Eric quickly found himself losing his self-consciousness and enjoying the time with Beth. She made him feel comfortable in a way he hadn't in a long, long time. Made him feel like it was safe to just relax and be himself. And that was a dangerous thing, considering this was all for show. Around them, couples did variations on the standard shuffle-step, air punch, favored by white guys the world over, and Eric looked over at Beth to find her biting back a laugh. Eric glanced down at his own shuffling feet, then chuckled himself. Okay, fine. He was no Fred Astaire, but he looked better than that guy who was busting a move over in the corner and, oops, busted the seam of his pants too. Beth did laugh then, the lilting sound washing over him like warm honey. His body tightened against his wishes. Time to get back to the table before things got out of hand. Except just as he reached for Beth's hand, the music switched to a sensual song, and Beth moved in closer to him, her spicy rose scent sending his nerve endings into overdrive. "Oh, I love this song, honey," she said, twining her arms around his neck and pressing all those luscious curves of hers against his front, and he nearly moaned with the pleasure. She was tall for a woman, fitting well with his own 6'3" height. The top of her head brushed his chin as they swayed in time with the music, and when she rose on tiptoe to whisper in his ear, he couldn't stop the shudder of awareness that swept through him like wildfire. "Do you see the Murphys anywhere?" The reminder of the couple from earlier acted like a cold shower to his overactive libido, and he gave a small sigh of relief. Work. That's what this was about. A job, nothing else. As one of the tallest guys in the room, he was able to easily scan over the crowd, but didn't spot them. "No, why?" "No reason. I was just curious about them." She leaned back slightly to observe the couples around them. "It's an old habit of mine." "What is?" he asked, doing his best not to notice the brush of her body against his as they danced. "Trying to figure out people's stories." She gave a sad little chuckle. "I was alone a lot as a kid. Too busy studying when the rest of the kids in my class were playing and making friends." "I'm shocked to hear that," he said, making light of it, even though his heart ached just a little thinking of poor little Beth locked away in a library by herself. "I guess that's why you're so smart now." She gave him an assessing stare, as if to see if he was mocking her or not, then smiled. "It is. I've always been ambitious. It's not a crime, you know." "No, it's not." He resisted the urge to pull her closer into him again and looked at one of the couples close by. "What about them? What's their story?" Beth's pretty gaze narrowed as she watched them. "I'd say they've grown apart, focusing on their careers and taking care of their 3 sons. They want to rekindle the spark that first brought them together." He wrinkled his nose. "You can tell that just by looking at them?" "No." Beth shook her head and grinned. "They said so in therapy earlier." "Weren't you paying attention?" "I was too busy scrambling to keep up with you changing our cover story at the last minute." "Touché." She stared at the center of his chest, frowning. "I am sorry about that." "It's okay. I've learned to roll with the punches over the years. Not much rattles me now." He shifted slightly, careful not to step on her toes. "That's what makes a SEAL so useful. Adaptability. Is it hard for you, being home on leave, away from all the action and your team?" Beth looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the soft-colored light strung from the ceiling and her expression pensive. If he leaned in a bit closer, he could capture her lips in another kiss, see if she tasted as sweet as he remembered. Trace his tongue over her pink mouth, down her neck. "Whoa." He cleared his throat and looked anywhere but at her. "It's fine. After I got shot, the surgeon said I needed surgery and a few weeks to heal, or I'd risk permanent muscle and nerve damage. I can't say I haven't gotten restless, sitting around staring at the TV all day. But I'm handling it. Helps to know I'll be back with my team in a few weeks. Makes me feel less useless." "You're not useless, not to me anyway." Her gaze flickered over his face. "Will you answer a curious reporter's question?" "I probably can't stop you from asking, so sure, go ahead." He smiled at her. "What was it like, getting shot? I know you can't talk about specific mission-related details. Heath reminds me of that all the time. But, just in general. Was it scary, or were you too caught up in what you were doing to even have a chance to react?" Her hand moved to his left shoulder, and he shivered beneath her gentle touch. She froze, looking up at him. "I'm sorry. Did I hurt you?" "No," he croaked out, though there was a definite ache starting in his balls. Thankfully, the song ended, and an announcement was made that dinner was served. Before he led Beth to their table, he said, "I didn't see it coming. 1 second I was fine, then just a beat later, my shoulder was on fire. Then the next thing I remember, I woke up in the medical unit. Sorry. That's probably a pretty boring story for a gal like you, but it's the truth. I suspect there's more, but I'll wait until you're ready to tell me. I look forward to being interrogated." He kept his tone light as he led her off the dance floor, but he knew the conversation wasn't over. As they dug into the crisp veggies of their salads, Beth kept glancing his way, her assessing looks leaving him feeling decidedly unsettled, which, for a guy like him, who'd faced down snipers and lived to tell the tale, was odd to say the least. But there was something about Beth that left him twisted around and breathless and bothered in the best possible way. That also left him ready to spill his secrets and invite her to see the real him. And that was the worst part of all this. Beth was Heath's sister. And yeah, they were both adults. But he didn't want to go behind his best bud's back like that. Heath had called him to look in on Beth, not to get involved with her. He was there as cover, as her protector, as her partner, not as her lover. He needed to keep his head in the game and his heart out of the picture, because his instinct said if he didn't, this thing between them could be far more dangerous to the well-constructed barriers around his heart than any battlefield. Chapter 8. Beth spent the next morning uploading the photos she'd taken the day prior and emailing them to her editor, along with an update on what she and Eric had found so far, which wasn't much. All she'd learned was that the resort was obsessed with Wi-Fi, and that the reviews might not actually be a match for the guests' experiences. They'd hung around the main building after dinner, hoping to overhear conversations between guests or staff, but it had all been a bust. The whole thing was frustrating. Maybe today she'd find something, or so she thought until she consulted the schedule. Rock climbing was on the agenda for the morning. That didn't seem like much of an opportunity to learn anything. She tried to find her positive attitude as she changed into bike shorts and a tank top, put on her hiking boots, then met Eric outside. He looked more relaxed today than he had the night before, but no less gorgeous. He'd gone for a swim and run earlier, and his hair was still damp from his shower. The slick, dark strands were combed back away from his face, highlighting his high cheekbones and chiseled jaw. Man, if only he wasn't her brother's best friend, she'd be all over him like plastic wrap on leftovers. As it was, though, she was glad to have some physical exertion to help burn off her excess adrenaline. From the way Eric seemed to be chomping at the bit to get going, she would guess he felt the same. Or maybe he was always like this. How would she know? They were still fundamentally strangers, no matter how close she felt to him. They walked up the boardwalk to the beach, then followed the path up to the main building where the rest of the couples were gathering. This was another group activity, same as the therapy session the day before. The resort brochure called it holistic intervention, but Beth figured the benefits really boiled down to fresh air and sunshine and hard work. Period. A chance to get it all out there and build teamwork, since each couple climbed the cliff face together. As she and Eric waited to board the shuttle that would take them to the far side of the island where the climb would take place, Beth couldn't help noticing that Eric hadn't really said more than 2 words to her since they'd returned from the party last night. In fact, he seemed to be avoiding her altogether, if his averted gaze was any indication. Never one to be ignored. Beth couldn't let it alone. "What's wrong, honey?" Using the endearment still felt a bit strange, but repetition was good. With all the other couples so close by, they couldn't afford to blow their cover now anyway. Eric stared off into the distance and shook his head. "Nothing. Why?" "Because you're doing your level best to pretend I'm not here, that's why." "That's not true," he said, putting his hand on her lower back as the line moved forward. "I'm just concentrating on the mission." "Really? Something smelled around there, and it wasn't manure from the composted flower beds either. Is this about the ball last night? Because if you're embarrassed about your dancing, I can tell you that it wasn't that bad. I mean, I've seen some awful dancers in my time, like my last boyfriend, Devin. Guy couldn't find the beat if his life depended on it. One time, we were at a friend's wedding. A woman actually asked him if he was having a seizure. It was that bad. So if..." "It wasn't the dancing, okay?" he said as they neared the door to the shuttle. He raised the mirrored aviator shades he was wearing to rest them on top of his head, and she got her first look at his warm brown gaze. The emotions lurking there, Lust, loneliness, want, wariness made her breath catch. Okay then, definitely not the dancing making him so squirrely. An answering heat rose inside her as well, causing moisture to gather in her core as she was struck by the certainty that he wanted her. The knowledge felt so forbidden and so fantastic. It had been so long, too long, since a man had looked at her like that. Not since Devon. Stupid, selfish Devon. He'd been her first long-term boyfriend in college, and their relationship had been fine at first. At least until he'd received a job offer in Manhattan right before graduation, shortly after Beth had accepted her first internship with a huge newspaper in Seattle. Devon just assumed she'd quit and give up everything to follow him to the East Coast. He'd been wrong. She'd loved him, yes, but she'd had dreams of her own to chase, and she couldn't do that while following after him. They'd fought. The thing that really clinched it for her, though, were his words during their last brutal argument. He'd said that it shouldn't matter if she quit now, since she'd eventually give it all up anyway to get married and have kids. Such an idiot. It was the 21st century, not the Victorian age. Women could do it all, have both a satisfying career and an awesome home and family life. It just took hard work and balance. Most of all, it took the right person to come along. Didn't it? As they boarded the shuttle, her mind churned that idea around. In the years since Devon, she'd barely even thought about having it all. Her focus had been strictly on her career. Why was that popping into her head now? It made her heart thump in her chest to even consider combining family and career. But the thought didn't feel bad, necessarily. A little scary, maybe, but not bad. Eric slid into the seat beside hers, his thigh bumping into hers, and soon they were rumbling through the island's tropical rainforest, heading for the mountains in the distance. She'd read online that they were extinct volcanoes, which also explained the abundance of flora and fauna in the area, as the soil was rich with nutrients. Eric had retreated to Mr. Stoic and silent, and she wanted him to talk. She wanted to know more about him, so she tried a different route to spark conversation. Have you ever climbed before? Some, he said, staring out the window beside her, keeping his voice low to avoid being overheard. We learned the basics of climbing and rappelling during SEAL training, since we never knew the kind of terrain we might be deployed in next. I know the training is intense. Heath gave me a few details, but it must be amazing too. Can be. He really was being reticent. What about you? Does the rock wall in my gym count? She asked, grinning up at him. He snorted and shook his head. Just stick with me, kid. I'll protect you. That's my plan. The air between them seemed to shimmer with possibilities again, and that heat wasn't back in his eyes. This time, it was her looking away instead of giving in to the temptation to climb on his lap and kiss him until they were both gasping for breath. She turned her attention to the view outside the window, and about 10 minutes later, they pulled up at the base of the largest mountain in the range of 3. All the couples piled out of the shuttle, and their guide for the day went over basic instructions of how to use the equipment, what to watch out for on the cliff face, and when to engage the safety mechanism on the gear. They were split up into 5 groups of 3 couples each and placed along the cliff face, where the gear had all been set up, and a junior instructor waited for each group. Because Eric had experience climbing, he and Beth were chosen to go first in their little group. She was fine with that. While heights didn't bother her, the thought of plummeting to her death did. So the sooner she got it out of the way and conquered that fear, the better. Eric suited up while the instructor helped Beth into her harness and showed her how to work the ropes and carabiners. Finally, she and Eric started up the cliff face, side by side. Things were going well, and she was finding her hand and toe holds quickly. Then about halfway up, her competitive streak kicked in. Eric was taller than her and therefore faster, but she had agility on her side. Being smaller meant she could be nimbler. As long as she didn't look down, she was fine. She caught up to him, then moved on ahead, casting him a challenging, triumphant grin as she passed him by. His deep chuckle sent a shiver of awareness clear down her spine. Slow down there, Speedy. Eric said from a foot away. This isn't a race. Isn't it? She reached for her next handhold only to hear an ominous snapping sound, like metal reaching its breaking point. Next thing she knew, she was falling. Her heart skipped and her scream lodged in her throat. Don't let me die this way, please, God. Her stomach went into free fall along with her body, the safety ropes waving uselessly in front of her. Time seemed to slow, and the only thing she could think about was that she'd finally screwed up, just like her parents always worried she would. Her ambition had done her in at last. If only she hadn't gotten cocky. If only she hadn't tried to make this into a race. If only... A strong hand wrapped around her arm and tugged her sideways into a hard, warm chest. Are you okay? Eric's voice was rough with concern, and his breath was warm on her scalp as he buried his face in her hair, holding her tightly to him. Sounds slowly began to register again, the wind whipping around them, the shouts from their instructor below, the steady, reassuring thud of Eric's heartbeat beneath her ear. Sweetheart, please say something. Beth tried to talk, but her vocal cords seemed to be paralyzed. She nodded vigorously instead, her entire body trembling in the aftermath of her near-death experience. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. Bad enough she'd made a fool out of herself in front of all these people. She wasn't going to cry in front of them too. No matter how terrified she'd been, no matter how close to dying she'd come. A tiny sob escaped without her consent, and Eric held her tighter, kissing the top of her head. It's okay, baby. I've got you. I won't let anything happen to you, I promise. His words felt like the greatest gift she'd ever received. She wanted to bury herself inside him and never come out. This went beyond a pretend relationship, beyond pretend feelings. This felt like the most real moment she'd ever experienced with anyone ever. She clutched the sides of his shirt in her shaking fingers as he slowly lowered them both down to the ground. The instructor rushed over to them, along with the other two couples who had been part of their group, but Eric's arms stayed around her, and thank God for that, because otherwise she couldn't have remained on her feet. Her knees felt about as stable as water. Are you all right? The instructor asked, her face pasty white with fear. Beth didn't imagine her own looked much better. What happened up there? Eric mumbled something under his breath as he fiddled with her gear. This is what happened. He held up one of the carabiners from her safety harness. It's been tampered with. The instructor's face went even paler, if that were possible. No, I checked all this gear out myself earlier this morning. It was all fine. Who would do that? That's the question of the day, isn't it? Eric said, unfastening the defective carabiner from the harness and holding it up for closer inspection. Yep, you can see the marks on it right here. He pointed to one side of the thing. Definitely cut. Who had access to this gear besides you? Any of the resort staff, the instructor said. I can't believe this happened. I need to get the lead over here and show this to him. Hang on. As she rushed off to get her boss, Eric pulled Beth tighter into his side. The other two couples huddled around them, the women trying to fuss over Beth, but she just pressed tighter into Eric's side. Now that she was back on solid earth, gravity seemed to be pulling down on her harder than usual. Or maybe that was just the weight of the stares of those around her. Even though they were showing concern and trying to be kind, it still made her uncomfortable. She hated to appear weak, but there wasn't much she could do about it now. The reporter in her urged her to take note of the people around her, to see if anyone was acting suspiciously, but she couldn't be certain how much she'd retain later of anything she tried to take note of now. It all seemed to blur together. Even Eric talking with the lead instructor, then bundling her back onto the shuttle to return to the resort, seemed like an out-of-body experience. Beth felt like a rag doll, lifeless and drained emotionally and physically. While it wasn't her usual MO to depend on others for help, she was mighty glad Eric was by her side through it all. She cuddled closer into him on the shuttle's bench seat, the effects of shock making her shiver as she peered up into his worried face. Thank you, sweetheart, he growled before capturing her lips in a brief, passionate kiss. He pulled away and pushed her head down onto his chest again. Don't ever scare me like that again, okay? I was afraid I'd lost you. She nuzzled into his warmth, closing her eyes. Because of the job. His words chased her into slumber, haunting her and thrilling her at the same time. No, not because of the job, because of you, sweetheart. Chapter 9. Eric prided himself on being a gentleman, and he wasn't about to stop behaving himself now, no matter how hard the adrenaline and need to assure himself she was all right coursed through him. Besides, she was sleeping against him now, a sleep probably brought on by a combination of crashing adrenaline and shock. Either way, it made her warm and soft and vulnerable, and it brought out every alpha male instinct he had, wrong or not. Beth might hate him for it later, but he was going to take care of her now. Whatever she needed, he'd be there to give it to her. The shuttle halted outside the main resort buildings a short time later, and Eric scooped Beth up into his arms to carry her all the way back to their private bungalow. He waved off the staff who rushed at him, wanting to assist and to apologize for what had happened. He didn't trust a single one of them anywhere near her. Someone here had tried to harm Beth, to kill her. They'd almost succeeded. Soon, he would find out who it was and make them pay. But not now. Now was about her, taking care of her. Once he got them inside, she stirred against him. He kept a hold on her, but put her gently on her feet before him and brushed the loose hair from her face to assess any injuries she might have. She had scratches on her soft skin from bumping the sharp stones, dirt smudged on her cheeks, and she looked shaken and exhausted. But that seemed to be the extent of it, thankfully. It could have easily been so much worse. The picture of her dropping off the cliffside would stay with him forever. She was looking up at him, weariness etched into every line of her face, and his heart ached. He turned her to sit on the edge of the sofa. "Stay here, sweetheart. I'm going to run you a hot bath." Meekly, she did as he asked. That right there was enough to let him know she wasn't herself. Beth wasn't a woman who liked being told what to do. He loved that about her. His mind snagged on that as he went into the bathroom and flipped on the hot water in their jacuzzi tub. Loved? Nah, it was just a saying, an expression people used. He didn't love Beth Williams. That would be ridiculous. They barely knew each other. They were working a job together. Besides, she was so far off limits, he needed a map to find his way to her. No. He was merely attracted to her, and he was here to help and protect her. That was all. That was all it could be. Once he'd filled the tub and added half a bottle of the sweet-smelling soap stuff on the counter, he went back out to find Beth standing and staring out the doors leading onto the veranda. The warm breeze drifted in, fragrant with jasmine and the scent of the sea. She looked like a goddess come to life, despite her ruffled appearance, and Eric wanted her so badly he hurt. Beth turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Someone tried to kill me. I thought I was going to die today." He stepped closer and nodded, words failing him. He'd thought that too. "You saved me." She moved closer, close enough for their bodies to touch. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. "You know how people talk about regrets? Things that they didn't do in life? I'd always thought mine would be about the Pulitzer Prize I didn't win or the cover story I failed to finish. But if you hadn't saved me today, I think my biggest regret would have been... you..." Eric blinked down at her, trying to take that in. "Me? What do you mean?" "I want you," she said. "It's as simple as that. I wanted you the second I saw you in the newsroom. Since then, I've been coming up with a list of reasons for why I shouldn't have you." She gave him a wan smile. "None of those mattered when I was plummeting down the cliff face. And now I can't come up with any rational reason why we shouldn't make love." He gulped in a breath, not sure he could trust what he was hearing and unwilling to take advantage. "Beth, you've had a terrible scare. This might be the shock talking. You don't..." "Don't I?" She stopped him. "Tell me you don't want me, and I'll back off. But if you do, why shouldn't we have this? We're here. We're alive. We have a chance to make each other feel good. Why shouldn't we take it?" Maybe it was the life or death situation they'd just gone through. Maybe it was magic of the island. Maybe it was the silent plea in her eyes. Whatever it was, he didn't hesitate now. Yes, she was his best friend's sister. Yes, there'd be lots of explaining to do later. But he wanted her more than he wanted his next breath, and the fact she wanted him too was like the headiest aphrodisiac in the universe. "I do want you." "Then, come with me," she invited, stepping away from him and moving toward the open bathroom door. "Make love with me. Please." There was nothing he could do but follow her. He couldn't deny himself what he'd wanted since nearly the moment he'd met her. He caught up with her and took her in his arms. With one foot, he kicked the bathroom door closed. Chapter 10. "Please accept our apologies again, Mrs. Holman," Robert Hart said to Beth the next morning as she waited for the group therapy session to start. His expression was earnest enough, but she still didn't trust the guy. And yes, she still felt a bit off-kilter, though that had more to do with her steamy night with Eric than falling off the side of a cliff. "I promise you my staff is looking into the matter to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. At this point, all we can think is that it must have been a prank of some kind that went horribly wrong. But of course, we'll do whatever is necessary to get to the bottom of it." A prank? Did he seriously expect people to believe that? But Beth supposed he had to tell people something. Those other couples had been standing right there when Eric pointed out what had happened to her gear, and she was sure it hadn't taken long for word to spread. People would be asking questions, and the resort couldn't claim it had just been an accident. Beth gave him a polite, fake smile. "Thank you, but I'm late to meet my husband. If you'll excuse me." She walked away, leaving the still-talking Hart behind her. She just couldn't stay near him any longer, not even to help keep up her undercover persona. Everything about him set her on edge. Beth headed to the large open rec room where they were holding this morning's session. She tried to hide her frustration as she got stopped a dozen times by other couples who had heard what had happened and wanted to see if she was all right. Her smile got more and more strained as she repeated the same answers over and over. Yes, it had been scary. But no, she hadn't been hurt. No, she didn't know who might have tampered with her gear. No, she wasn't sure if she agreed with the theory that it was a prank. But hopefully the investigation would find out who was responsible. And yes, her husband sure had been a hero, with the way he saved her. Her eyes caught on Eric's as she finally was able to approach him, and his slow smile sent all sorts of wicked waves of heat through her. "Hey, baby." He leaned in and kissed her. It was a brief, public display kind of kiss, but it was a sharp reminder of their night together. Last night had been, well, it had been pretty incredible. After their time in the tub and a nice nap together, they'd made love twice more before finally rolling out of bed this morning. Beth was kind of surprised she could still move. It had been that mind-blowing and body-weakening. He'd made her feel things. Feel in the physical sense, not the emotional sense, she reminded herself. Because their erotic tryst had had just as much to do with the need to affirm life after her brush with death yesterday as it did any true emotions between them other than pure lust. What they'd shared was just sex. Good sex, amazing sex. But nothing more than that. This was all temporary. She had to remember that, no matter how her heart fluttered around him, no matter how her lips still tingled from his kisses, and despite the marks she still had on her hips from where he'd held her tight in the heat of passion. Eric had been sweet and gentle one minute, then alpha and demanding in his desire the next, and Beth had loved every second of it. Perhaps too much. What she needed today was to get her head out of the haze of satisfaction he'd left her in and put her mind back in the game. Yes, she was beyond grateful for him coming to her rescue, but they still had a mystery to solve here and a job to get done. So she planned to keep things strictly platonic between them from here on out, so she could focus on making sure her story was watertight before she left the resort. She was absolutely certain that that was the right decision. She just hadn't gotten around to telling him that yet. But there was no moment like the present. To that end, she squared her shoulders. "Good morning. Have a nice run." "Always." He grinned, the heat in his eyes making her toes curl in her flip-flops. Darn it. Couldn't stop thinking about you, though. Last night was... Beth looked away, heat prickling her cheeks. Eric, last night is over. It was good. Don't get me wrong, but I think we should probably cool it now. I have work to do, and the days are going by quickly. I need to pour my energy into my story. I don't want to jeopardize my story over a little fling. It hurt her to trivialize what they'd shared. Whether she'd admit it aloud or not, their night together had been special to her. For those hours they'd spent in each other's arms, the rest of the world hadn't existed. No one had ever made her feel like that before, not even Devin, who she'd supposedly loved. I hope you're good with keeping our relationship strictly platonic from here on out. He didn't respond for a moment, carefully scrutinizing her face. She was doing the same to him, and she noticed his slight wince before he hid it away beneath his usual unreadable expression. She wondered if they taught that trick in the SEALs, since her brother did the same thing. Heath compartmentalized things and switched off his emotions to the point where it made Beth furious sometimes. She was all for rational thinking, but these guys took it so far that they became more like robots than men. Eric hadn't been a robot at all the afternoon before, though. His concern for her had been genuine and on display. His lovemaking had been far from scripted or controlled. Sure, whatever, Eric finally said, an edge to his voice now. I was going to say the same thing to you this morning. Last night was fun and all, but I'm not looking for anything more than a one-night stand. The coldness in his tone pinched her heart, which was totally stupid. This was what she'd wanted. No strings, no messy emotions, no distractions from the job she was here to do. So why did his words hurt so much? She couldn't explain that, but she also couldn't let it show. Glad we're agreed on that. It's for the best. If she worked hard enough, she could almost convince herself that was true. So why did she want to apologize for her words, take them back, and fling herself into his arms? Thankfully, the therapy session started before she could act on that impulse. Welcome to day 3 of the Love Fix retreat, ladies and gentlemen, Hart said, drawing everyone's attention. We hope that you're growing closer together as couples and working through the issues that brought you here to regain the intimacy you've lost. We're so glad to see everyone here after yesterday's incident. He gave Beth another apologetic look before continuing. And now, let's get started. Today we'll be working on rebuilding trust between partners. We'll start with trust falls. This requires both partners to fully trust the person they're with to catch them. Hart demonstrated with a woman from his staff. The woman closed her eyes and fell straight backward, arms extended at her sides. Hart stood several feet behind her and caught the woman under the arms before she hit the floor. Eric tensed beside her, and Beth exhaled slowly. Great. After what she'd been through the day before, it was asking a lot of her to free fall, but she'd do it, if for no other reason than to prove to herself she wasn't afraid. Fear was the enemy of success, and Beth refused to allow it to get in the way of her goals. It helped that she had faith in Eric to catch her. He had yesterday in much more challenging conditions. This would be easy for him. Despite what she just said to him, she had faith that he wouldn't let her down. He'd proven that. Let's find a mat in the center of the room, she said, moving through the crowd without looking back. Yesterday, she'd have taken his hand to prove to anyone watching that they were a couple. Today, that kind of physical contact seemed fraught with too much meaning, so it was best avoided. She stopped at a mat where they were surrounded by 5 couples. This is good. Why here? He asked, keeping his voice low. I'm hoping to listen in to other participants' conversations. Might find a lead there. She tuned in, but all she heard was nervous chatter about the activity. She understood that. Trust was tough. Are you sure you're okay doing this? Eric asked her as they moved into position. You could catch me instead. She almost laughed. Oh, I doubt it. I'm in good shape and strong, but you're at least 200 pounds of solid muscle. You fall backward at me, we'll both hit the floor. She shrugged. Besides, I'm good with this. Really? She had to be. She wouldn't let herself not be. She moved in front of him and waited while he positioned himself on the mat behind her. Truth was, she was scared after yesterday, but she wouldn't let that hold her back. Best to get right back in the saddle again, as her dad had always said. "All right," Eric said from behind her. "I'm ready whenever you are." Beth inhaled deeply, forcing her tense shoulders to relax. Worst case scenario, Eric missed catching her and she hit the mat. It was a good 3 to 4 inches of foam. She'd get bruised and maybe strain something, but she'd survive. It was all good, and he wasn't going to miss. Falling. The world tilted as she let her weight rock back onto her heels and then tipped over into free fall. For a second, the fear from the day before rushed back, clogging her throat and tripping her pulse. Then Eric's hands were there, warm and safe and steady, supporting her weight easily, catching her under the arms. She opened her eyes and stared up into his troubled brown gaze. Shadows lurked there, hurt, confusion, loneliness, and something tightly coiled inside her unfurled. She'd done her best to convince herself that her attraction to Eric wasn't anything serious. Just a fling, no big deal. Circumstances, hormones. She could rattle off a list of what caused them to end up in bed together. But now, as their eyes locked and he gently lowered her to the mat, it felt like a whole lot more than that. A whole lot more than just a fling. A whole, very big deal indeed. Chapter 11. No, not that way. Listen to me. Follow my voice, Beth said an hour later. I'm trying, Eric said, growing more frustrated by the second. Between the fact that he couldn't see because of the blindfold over his eyes and the distraction of the other couples bumping around and laughing, it was all more than a tad disorienting. Honestly, he'd known he was in trouble the second that therapy dude had explained this second exercise. Lead your partner from one location to another, just with the sound of your voice. No touching. He'd actually done this 1,000,000 times on missions. Night ops were given as a SEAL, and while many times they had night vision goggles to help them see where they were going, other times they went in hot, with no time to do anything other than grab their weapons and go. At those times, the sound of their commander's voice was their only roadmap back to safety. It kind of felt the same way now, except Beth was doing the guidance, and around her, he felt anything but safe, emotionally. She'd blown that out of the water with just a few words earlier. He didn't know what he'd expected from her, but it hadn't been her rejection. He'd clammed up immediately, pretended like it didn't matter to him, but it had, more than he cared to admit. At the same time, he was kicking himself because he'd started to trust her, to let down his guard around her. He'd so rarely done that in his life since surviving all the stuff his father had put him and his mother through. Now he and Beth were stuck together for the rest of the week, playing these stupid games. It was all like one of his nightmares come to life. Part of him wanted to rip the blindfold off and say to heck with all of it. But the other part of him, the part that was so attuned to every nuance of Beth after their steamy night together, couldn't stand the thought of disappointing her like that. The roles they had assumed were important to her because they would aid her investigation. She was chasing a story, and he wasn't going to be the one to stand in the way of that. "Where are we going?" he asked, when the din of the rec room lessened and a warm breeze tickled his skin. The sounds of seagulls pierced the air, and Eric breathed a bit easier. She'd let him outside. Nature always helped ground him and get him out of his head, which was good. "Can't tell you, but you're doing great," she said from a short way in front of him. Good. Now turn slightly to your right and then walk straight ahead." He did so, the pavement of the sidewalk warm beneath his bare feet. That felt solid, comforting. Maybe he could do this. Maybe he could trust her, at least for a little while. Maybe he could let her in a bit, at least until this session was over, and then he'd see. He swallowed hard and continued on the path she'd directed, hands out in front of him to avoid colliding with any unidentified objects. "You can drop your arms," she said from closer than he expected. "I won't let you walk into anything, I promise." Promises. They hadn't made any to each other. Still, he'd lied to her earlier about last night. Last night had been amazing. even for an experienced guy like him. At first, he'd tried to tell himself that it was only the adrenaline rush of her accident that had boiled over into passion. And maybe that partly accounted for that first time in the tub. But later, when he'd woken up with her in bed and they'd made love again in the pre-dawn gloom, it hadn't had anything to do with a crisis. There had been no danger or urgency to account for their desire. There'd just been the two of them, exploring each other, experiencing each other. His body tightened with the memories of how she'd tasted, smelled, sounded as she'd come apart around him. "Okay, step up," she said. And he did. Good. And again. The temperature dropped slightly, and Eric's skin prickled with coolness. The sounds of nature died away, and he realized they were in another building. Not the rec room, since this space was silent, except for the squeak of her rubber flip-flops on the floor. Just a few more steps straight ahead, and we're there. Eric followed the sound of her voice like a beacon, then stopped abruptly at the press of her palms against his chest. Awareness jolted through him from her touch, and he clenched his fists at his sides to keep from reaching for her. It would be the most natural thing in the world to take her in his arms, kiss her, love her. But none of that was an option. Not anymore. "Take off your blindfold," she said, her whisper giving him all sorts of naughty ideas about how they might put this blindfold to good use later. He slipped off the covering over his eyes and blinked a few times before looking around the interior of the main building. The place was deserted except for a few staff members busy on their computers visible through the partially open door of the office behind the desk. Even the lights were off, leaving only the sunshine outside to slant in through the open windows to cast a hazy half-light. "What are we doing here?" Beth crooked her finger at him, then inclined her head toward the door to the computer room he'd explored their first day here. "Perfect time for snooping, I'd say. Everyone seems occupied." He had to agree with her there. After a quick scan around to make sure no one was watching them, they slipped into the computer room and shut the slatted wood door behind them. It was dark in here, but Beth turned on one of the computer monitors in the corner, and soon an eerie greenish glow gave them enough illumination to make their way through the maze of table without tripping over anything. There must be 20 terminals in here, but why? They certainly don't need this for their staff. She sat down behind one of the computers. "Let's see what's on the desktop. This icon says guest accounts." She clicked the mouse and blew out a breath. "Crap! It's password protected." Through the slatted door, the sound of voices outside drifted closer, and Eric tensed, putting his finger to his lips. Whoever it was went on past, their voices and footsteps fading. "We don't have time to try and hack into the system." It wasn't his area of expertise on his team, but he'd watched his teammate do it. He made it look easy. Eric was sure it wasn't and wished he'd paid more attention. With a disgruntled sigh, Beth stood, leaving the computer on for light. "You're right, and it's not like I know how to do that anyway." "Okay then, let's still check around here quickly though to see if there's anything else I can use." There wasn't much in the room, other than computers, servers, and a few printers. Eric made his way over to those and found printed papers left in one of the trays. He carried them over to Beth, squinting at the columns of names and numbers. "What about these? Looks like some kind of financial report." She took the papers from him and frowned. These seemed to be bank account numbers and balances. Big balances. Why would the resort have these? Does Hart have other businesses? These could be connected to those. Everything is under the parent company of Hartstrings, Inc. There's the resort, of course. Also, Hart's published some books on relationships. I don't recommend them. You've read his books? All in the name of research. It was a bunch of New Age BS. She thought for a moment. He does some paid public speaking spots in his private therapy sessions, mostly for the rich and famous. Other than that, I couldn't find that Hartstrings did or made or sold anything. Besides, businesses don't usually have money sitting in accounts. Not this much, anyway. Let's take these with us and give them a closer look. She had a line between her brows that he had the overwhelming urge to kiss away. But she was in work mode, so he kept his hands and lips to himself. Instead, He took the papers from her, folded them in half, and put them in the deep pockets of his cargo shorts. Footsteps sounded on the other side of the door again. "Time to go," he whispered and scanned his surroundings for a place to hide. They could duck under a table for cover, but it wouldn't hide them very well. The footsteps were getting closer. He needed a plan, and only one suggested itself to him. "Roll with me on this." He was able to give her 2 seconds of warning before he pushed her against the wall and brought his lips to hers. His hands sunk into her glossy hair as he devoured her mouth. By the time the door swung open, they would look to anyone coming in like a couple in a passionate embrace, which they were. There was nothing fake about this. He kissed her and she responded immediately. Her hands were fisted in his shirt front and her body arched into his. The overhead lights flicked on. Out of the corner of his eye, Eric saw 2 youngish men enter the room. If it came to a fight, he could take them, but he planned to bluff his way out of this instead. "Excuse me," one said. "What are you doing in here?" Eric took his time breaking the kiss, partly because it added to the show, and partly because he wasn't willing to stop before he had to. In front of him, Beth's eyes blinked open, full of passion and a shred of fear. He wanted to kiss that away. Instead, he held her gaze for a second, silently reassuring her that he would keep her safe, until she gave a tiny nod. "Sorry," he turned to the men. "We were just looking for some privacy. You know how it is. When the mood strikes." He gave the guys a conspiratorial grin. They had to see how gorgeous Beth was, so it shouldn't be any surprise that he wanted her. "I believe you've been assigned a bungalow." The guy's tone was stiff and formal. "Sure, but that seemed so far away." The guys looked unimpressed, so Eric just shrugged. "Come on, sweetheart, let's take this back to our room," he said, taking Beth's hand and leading her to the door. The guys stared at them but made no move to stop them. Once they were outside, Eric could see that the therapy session was over. People were milling around the resort without blindfolds. "That was close," Beth whispered, "and I kind of loved it." He shot her a sidelong glance, wanting to ask if she'd loved the kiss or the thrill of getting caught. His adrenaline was racing, coursing through his body like he was on a mission. He knew, though, that it was from the kiss, not the danger. Chapter 12. A couple of hours later, Beth rubbed her tired eyes and rolled her stiff neck. She'd been sitting at her laptop since she and Eric had returned from their adventure in the computer room, trying to make sense of the reports they'd found. So far, she'd had no luck. She could understand why the resort would have credit card information on guests, perhaps even checking account numbers, if they accepted payment that way. But balance information? That was fishy. Of course, she couldn't know for sure that it was guest information, but that was the only thing that made sense. Unless Hartstrings was laundering money, but if it was, then for who? None of her research revealed a connection to organized crime. That was probably a dead end. So frustrating. And the paperwork wasn't the only thing bringing her frustration. That kiss in the computer room had wound her up tight. She glanced over at Eric. He was sprawled on the sofa, his long legs crossed at the ankles as he surfed the web for intel on his half of the reports. Even tousled and tired, he was still the sexiest man she'd ever seen. Fresh desire pooled in her core, and despite her best intentions otherwise, Beth found herself wandering over to sit down next to him. "Find anything?" "Nah." He exhaled slowly. "You?" "Nope." She couldn't resist tracing her finger over his cotton-covered chest, remembering how sleek and soft his skin had been beneath her touch the night before. Yes, she was here for her career. Yes, she'd planned to keep her hands to herself for the rest of the trip. But man, oh man, temptation was a terrible thing to waste, and they were stuck here on this isolated island together. Plus, she didn't think he'd been faking their kiss earlier. He'd been alert to the danger around them, but he'd wanted her. She could taste it. And she wanted him. There was something about Eric that brought out her passionate side. With one finger, she closed his laptop and leaned in to nuzzle the side of his neck. The spot she'd learned the night before drove him crazy with need. How about we take a break? I thought we weren't doing that. His gaze was level on her, but she could see the heat in his eyes. She shrugged. I know it's not wise, and I was trying to put some distance between us earlier, but, well, why shouldn't we enjoy each other? She could think of several reasons, actually, but she was willing to ignore all of them if it meant having him again. He let just enough silence pass that she thought he might reject her offer. With a growl, he set his computer aside and pulled her onto his lap. You have on too many clothes. Afterward, they lay in the living room, soaking in the warm ocean breezes blowing in off the veranda. Everything seemed peaceful and right, and good with her in his arms. Eric had rolled so that he was spooning Beth from behind, and he couldn't seem to stop stroking her soft skin or kissing the back of her shoulder. He should get up and get dressed. He shouldn't be this open, this vulnerable with her. And yet, he was. Tell me why you're still single, he said against the skin of her shoulder. He'd been wondering about that. You're beautiful, smart, funny. Some lucky guy should have snapped you up a long time ago. She snorted. Are you proposing? Her question hit him square in the chest, nearly knocking the wind from him. Of course he wasn't. He'd never even considered marriage. But she hadn't been serious, right? No, he said, and leaned up on one elbow to peer down at her. Relationships aren't my thing. And why is that? She arched a dark brow at him, giving him a glimpse of what she'd be like during an interview. Let's do tit for tat. I tell you my secrets, and you tell me yours. Deal? Eric sighed and laid back down. He didn't talk about why he wasn't looking for anything long-term. It was too wound up in his past, in his childhood, that he kept hidden away in a little compartment in his brain. If she wanted to know, though, he'd tell her. He could open up at least a little with her. Deal. Fine. She rolled over carefully to face him. The sofa wasn't that wide, but it was enough room to keep things intimate. This may be the most intimate conversation of Eric's life. I was engaged once, in college. Devin was everything I thought I wanted in a guy. Handsome, smart, ambitious. We had a lot in common. But that's where the problem started. I think we were too much alike. We were together for 2 years, but just before graduation, he got a job offer in Boston. I just accepted a big internship with a newspaper in Washington. So distance got in the way? He'd watched that happen often enough with his buddies in the SEALs. They were apart from their spouses and girlfriends too much, and it took a toll on their relationships. We might have found a way to work that out. Other couples do. No, the problem was that he expected me to just give up my opportunity and move to the East Coast with him. Yikes. That's pretty selfish. Eric had his faults, but he'd never ask someone to give up their dreams for him. He'd seen that go down with his parents, his mother giving up her own goals and aspirations, any sort of normal life to be with his con man father. He never planned to make those same mistakes. Love was about equality, about give and take, or at least it should be, in his mind. So, you dumped him then? I did, she spoke softly, but he didn't miss the slight hurt edging her tone. She'd cared about that jerk, obviously, if she'd agreed to marry him. The thought of some selfish dude breaking Beth's heart bothered him more than it should. She shrugged and gave a sad laugh. He didn't understand my reasoning. Said I would eventually give up my career anyway when we got married and had kids. So what difference did a few years make? Wow, yeah, that dude's messed up. Welcome to the 21st century, home slice. Home slice? Beth laughed, then kissed his chest, right over his heart, and sweetness swelled inside him like a balloon. I think you've been watching too many Fresh Prince of Bel-Air episodes on your medical leave. But thanks for taking my side on this. Anyway, Devin's history, I'm over him. But I've just been too busy working to date much in the years since. So, that's why I'm still single. She reached up to push the hair off his forehead. What about you? What's behind your no relationships policy? Your father? He should have known she'd make the connection. Eric closed his eyes and dredged up memories of the past, wincing at the lingering pain. He wouldn't talk about his father. The guy didn't deserve the recognition. He'd used Eric, his own son, in one of his schemes, then abandoned him and his mother. It was the ultimate betrayal. He still woke up at night with the weight of it heavy in his chest. How could a man he hadn't seen in years still have that effect on him? It ticked him off. Screw his dad. Still, he owed Beth some kind of explanation after the way she'd opened up to him about her ex. So he went with what was simplest. My parents' marriage wasn't good. My dad was a jerk who abandoned my mom and me. Probably the best thing that could have happened to us, honestly. Anyway, after seeing what they went through and the way she got hurt by him, I knew I didn't want that. Easiest way to prevent a bad relationship is not to start one in the first place. It was the bare-bones version of the story, but it was all he could make himself share. The rest was so despicable that he couldn't bring himself to say it. I'm sorry about your parents. Beth pushed him onto his back, then rested on his chest, stroking his chin with one finger. But I suspect there's more to your cynicism about relationships than a marriage that didn't work out. He gave a one-shoulder shrug. Just being realistic. I mean, relationships are traps, like you and your ex. You could have him, or you could have your career. Not both. It's fine either way, but that's a choice you make. I chose to be alone. It's working out all right for me. Is it, though? Her sad expression nearly did him in. Sounds like a pretty lonely way to live to me. Are you lonely? He countered. You don't have anyone special, and you spend all your time working, don't you? Some people might see that as lonely. She sighed and rested her head on his chest again, her soft hair tickling his skin. Sometimes I am. I have my family. I have good friends, but I don't have anyone to go home to at night and talk to about my day, my worries. Now he had an image of her all alone in an apartment. It ripped at his heart. He wanted to be there for her, but that wasn't who he was. Their conversation had gotten way deeper than he'd expected, far faster than he'd wanted. They laid there for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts, until Beth finally said, "When Devin left, he said he hoped I enjoyed giving up everything for my small-time career. That hurt more than anything else," he said. Restless, Eric rolled slowly. So Beth was beneath him once more, then cupped her face, staring down into her pretty eyes. Devin was a dick, good riddance, and sweetheart, trust me, there is nothing small-time about you. Chapter 13. Hang on a sec. I need to visit the ladies' room before we go back to the bungalow, Beth said, dropping a quick kiss on Eric's lips before she walked away from their table. He liked watching the sway of her hips in the clingy dress she wore. Once she was out of view, he pulled his attention back to his surroundings. They were at dinner in the restaurant adjacent to the main building, and the place was slowly emptying after everyone had eaten their fill of steak and lobster and fresh fish caught from the ocean beyond. Overall, the day had been one of the best of his life. Lazing around with Beth that afternoon, talking or making love or researching the internet for more clues to what was happening here on the island. It was enough to make a guy go soft, and he wasn't yet sure whether or not that was a bad thing. He should be happy. He was happy. A week prior, he'd been sitting alone in his apartment, staring at the TV and wondering when he would get medical clearance to rejoin his team. Now he was here on some tropical island, surrounded by sand and surf, and sleeping with the most beautiful woman he'd ever met. A woman who also happened to be his best bud's little sister. Yeah, that might be a problem. He had to remind himself that Beth was an adult. So was he. Neither of them should care what he thought about them being together. And yet Eric did. Probably because Heath had been by Eric's side through some of the most harrowing experiences in his life. War, terrorist attacks, hostage situations. Even the day he'd been shot, Heath had been there, helping him get to the medevac unit in safety. Things like that formed a bond stronger than blood. Then again, so did love. His heart squeezed at that thought. He didn't love Beth. No, he barely knew Beth. They'd been together less than a week. Most of that time, they'd just been faking a relationship. And yet, He felt closer to her than pretty much anyone else on Earth. Weird how that worked. He could barely believe that he'd shared so much of himself with her that afternoon. Soon enough, though, it would all be over soon, and they'd go their separate ways. His happiness started to fade at that thought. He would have to leave her to return to his life. This was an interlude. Nothing more. So why did the thought of that leave him feeling hollow? Just then, he heard something. It sounded like a scream. It was cut off almost immediately, but not before Eric noticed it. He was on his feet in an instant, running toward the direction the sound had come from, the bathrooms. Crap. Fear sizzled through his veins as the moment she'd slipped off that cliff face replayed in his head. He'd been there that time to save her. If she was in trouble now, he prayed he'd get to her in time. With a curse, he kicked open the ladies' room door and spotted Beth near the sinks, struggling with another person dressed in all black. She was putting up a good fight, kicking and screaming and punching, but her opponent was undeterred. The fact that her movements were restricted by the white sheath dress she wore didn't help. "Get your hands off of her," he shouted, rushing toward them. The assailant abandoned Beth and dove out an open window. Eric wouldn't have fit through the opening, and the attacker would be long gone before he got outside and around the building. Eric crossed the small space and gazed out the window, hoping to spot something that would help identify the attacker. But there was nothing except darkness outside. Whoever it was that had attacked Beth had to have been watching them, must have seen her come in here then snuck in through the window. Eric returned to Beth. She was bent over, panting, her hair disheveled, strands hanging loose from her updo to cover her face. He gathered her trembling form against him and held her close. She was strong, stronger than any woman he'd known, but she shouldn't have to be strong all the time. Right now, he wanted to be there for her, wanted to be her knight in shining armor, for as long as she'd let him. All too soon, she pushed away from him, however. "We need to go after them," she said, heading toward the bathroom door. "Absolutely not." He caught her arm and turned her to face him. "Whoever it was is long gone. Besides, you're not going after anyone tonight. I won't risk your safety." "I'm fine." She shook off his hold. "That guy grabbing me just tells me that I'm onto something." Yeah, he'd already arrived at that conclusion. He hadn't forgotten the intentional damage to her climbing equipment, either. That had been in the back of his mind all along. "You've been attacked twice now, Beth. I understand you want your story. But do you have to kill yourself to get it?" His words had come out harsher than he'd intended. But come on. This was life-threatening. The image of Beth hurt or dead somewhere had his chest aching with emotions he didn't want to think about too much right now. "No, we need to go back to the bungalow and think logically about our next steps. We need to call in some backup." "And tell them what?" she shot back. "We don't have any proof yet. Not to mention, our phones don't work most of the time. How are you planning to get the word out? Carrier pigeon." "We know that you were attacked. We can send out emails letting the authorities know." "What authorities? Whose jurisdiction are we even in? And why would they take us seriously when we only have theories about who's responsible? We won't get any help until we get answers, and we aren't going to find those by sitting around and waiting for someone else to save the day. We need to keep digging. We have to be close. Otherwise they wouldn't be working this hard to stop us." "Stop you," he yelled. "They're trying to kill you. You can't possibly think I'm going to stand by and let you put yourself in even more danger." Anger flashed in her eyes and color flushed her cheeks. "I'm not under your command. You don't get to give me orders and just expect me to fall in line. I'm not trying to be your CO, sweetheart." He raked a hand through his hair, feeling more frustrated by the second. "I care about you, okay? I don't want to see you get hurt, and it's my job here to protect you. That's part of the reason you brought me along, to watch your back. Listen to me. Whoever that was obviously won't hesitate to resort to violence if necessary. This is more than we can handle without backup. Maybe we should just chuck this whole idea altogether and head back to San Francisco." "No, I've come this far, and I'm not backing down now." She scowled at him, her lips compressing into a tight line. "Is this because we're sleeping together? Is that why you've turned into Mr. Overprotective? I get enough of that with my brother. I don't need it from you. Let me be clear. I'm staying. If you want to leave, you can. I have no hold on you. You don't do commitments, right? And I don't expect one from you, not as my lover or my bodyguard or whatever other role you think you have in my life. She turned on her high heel and headed back toward the smashed-open door. Swearing under his breath, Eric took off after her. No way was he leaving without her. He might not be able to get her off the island, but he could protect her while she was here, whether she wanted him to or not. He owed that much to Heath. He owed that much to himself because he'd never forgive himself if harm came to her. Beth woke up early the next morning after a lousy night's sleep. The previous evening, Eric had followed her back to the bungalow where they'd spoken no words to each other. She'd gone into the bedroom and closed the door, making it clear he wasn't sharing her bed. But after a night of tossing and turning, some of her fury from the night before had softened. She'd lashed out at Eric, partly to cover her own fear. And when she looked back on what she'd said, she realized she'd gone too far. Accusing him of wanting to control what she did because they had slept together had been unkind and untrue. He naturally protected those around him, probably made him a great SEAL. Unfortunately, it got in between her and her goal for this trip. Despite that, though, that she cared for him too. More than she should, since this relationship could only be a fling. It felt real, but it couldn't be. She needed to remember this and put aside her emotions to focus on why she was here at all. She needed someone to help her get her head screwed on straight because it was all over the place thanks to the handsome guy on the couch in the living room. All right, it was phone a friend time. Checking her cell, she saw that she had 2 bars of signal at the moment. She could only hope it would last. A moment later, she was dialing Layla. Hello. Her friend answered, sounding sleepy. Oh, crap. Sorry. It's super early in Vegas, isn't it? Ignore me. Go back to sleep. Beth was about to hang up when Layla stopped her. What's the matter, sweetie? Layla's tone was sympathetic but firm. Your investigation not going well? Progress is slow, but that's not... So the issue is with your SEAL, Layla guessed when Beth didn't finish her sentence. Did you sleep with him? Yes, and it was kind of spectacular, but now, let me guess, he's become overly protective and wants to prevent you from doing what you need to. How'd you know? I've got some personal experience with that. Let me tell you, you can't change the way these guys are wired. If he thinks you're in danger, he'll do whatever he thinks he has to in order to keep you safe. Layla said. What do I do? Beth asked. If anyone could come up with an answer for her, it would be Layla. Her friend's fiancé was a former SEAL. Clint was reserved, but so in love with Layla and her little boy. You can't stop Eric from protecting you, so the 2 of you are either going to fight the rest of the trip or find a way to live with it. Beth sighed. I don't know if I can make peace with him since he's stepping all over my independence, but I guess I should appreciate what he's offering. That's the spirit. In the background, a child cried, I gotta go. Sounds like my little man's up. Take care, Beth. I will. Thanks for talking. Beth hung up, feeling marginally better. Layla was right. Nothing was going to change Eric. She was going to have to accept that and try not to bristle against his protectiveness too much. After she showered and got dressed, she went into the living room and found the couch empty. A note was on the counter. Gone for a run. Stay inside and wait for me to get back. Well, screw that. She grabbed the pen and scribbled a message of her own. Meet me at the group therapy session at 9. After grabbing her bag and making sure she had her phone handy in her pocket, she left the bungalow to explore some. Maybe she'd get lucky. An hour later, she wasn't feeling lucky. She'd tried to talk to various members of the staff, but they all clammed up when she asked questions about the resort and its owner. Everyone seemed to follow the party line from the guys doing the gardening to the concierge. She had to do something to break this wide open. She got to the open rec room for the session just before it was scheduled to start. Eric was waiting for her outside. She turned and looked at the other participants already seated in a circle. What do you see? She asked with a nod toward the circle. He frowned, his expression less than chipper. She was guessing that he hadn't slept well either. Aside from a woman who completely ignored my request that she stay inside. Yes, aside from that, Beth said, steel in her tone as she gave him a tight-lipped smile. He just stared at her for a minute, and she could see that he was weighing whether or not to push it. He must have realized it wouldn't get him anywhere, because he let out a sigh and some of the tension dropped from his shoulders. A bunch of stupid suckers who should demand their money back for all this psychobabble crap, he answered. She snorted. Even with the awkwardness between them, he could still make her laugh. But that didn't fix anything between them. His behavior last night had hit far too close to what she'd experienced with Devon for her comfort. She'd thought Eric had understood how important this story was to her, had agreed with her goals and her plans on how to reach them. Apparently not. The fact he'd expected her to give it all up because he said so hurt her more than she wanted to say. She was going to have to make it clear that she was staying. Now was the time. We've only got a few days left, and I haven't figured out what's going on yet. But I'm surer than ever that something's up. All my instincts are on high alert. Eric peered up at the sky, his expression flat. Should I be looking for some kind of bat signal or something? Beth gave him an annoyed slap on his taut abs, which made him chuckle. She led the way to the last pair of seats in the circle. She barely listened to the session because she was so busy trying to figure out how she was going to finish the job she came here to do. She had just 2 days left and no groundbreaking story to show for it. Panic welled up inside her before she tamped it down. Her boss at the paper would be furious, her reputation would be toast. Her expense account would be revoked, and her goal of being a nationally recognized reporter would be over. No, she would not let that happen. 48 hours wasn't a long time, but it had to be enough. Any questions? Robert Hart asked at the end of their session. She might not know what Hart had said for the past hour, but she did remember the brochure they'd gotten the day they'd arrived at the retreat. Acting on pure impulse and a bit of desperation, she raised her hand. Robert Hart gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Yes, Beth? My husband and I would like to book a private therapy session if any are still available, she said. The brochure mentioned that was an option, for an extra fee, of course. Ah, yes. Hart gestured toward one of the staff members standing off to the side, recording the session, and they brought over his tablet. He pulled up his calendar, then glanced back at Beth. Certainly. As it happens, I have an opening this afternoon at 3. Will that work for both of you? Next to her, Eric had gone tense. He leaned over to whisper in Beth's ear. What are you doing, sweetheart? She smiled at him. Saving our marriage. She turned to Hart. We'll take it, thank you. Chapter 14. At 3 o'clock sharp, Eric found himself sitting in the office of Robert Hart. The decor in here looked like a fantasy island reject, all palm fronds and parrots and Hawaiian print upholstery. Then again, maybe Eric was being overly critical because he was feeling a tad bit cranky. Having the woman you were trying to protect thwart you at every turn tended to do that to a guy. Beth sat beside him, acting the part of doting wife to perfection. She'd changed into navy shorts and a white sleeveless top that made his fingertips itch to touch her smooth, tanned skin. He tapped his fist against the side of his thigh instead, to distract himself while they waited for Hart to start this bogus session. Also playing into his bad mood was the fact that Eric had spent the last couple of hours trying to figure out the best way to get off the island and discovering it wasn't as easy as he'd imagined. Flights only came in and out of the tiny airport there at the beginning and end of retreats, unless there was a medical emergency of some sort that the local hospital couldn't handle. Then special transport had to be arranged via the mainland. None of it made Eric feel any less stressed, or any more cordial. Right, let's get started then, shall we? Why don't you each tell me why you think you're here today? Robert Hart said from across his big carved mahogany desk. He sounded so pompous that it was a literal strain for Eric to keep from rolling his eyes. He was used to taking crap from his trainers and commanders, but he sure didn't need to take any from this guy. My husband and I want to work out the problems between us. We want to get past our trust issues and move forward. Beth flashed him a smile that silently asked him to play along. Don't we, honey? But Eric didn't feel like playing along. not when she was in danger and they were stuck on an island. He was a gurgling mass of turmoil inside, and he didn't like to be pushed. And right now, Beth was shoving all of his buttons so hard he feared he might break. He grunted in response. Hart narrowed his gaze on Eric, his expression unreadable. Not feeling cooperative? That's interesting. I'd think you'd have plenty to discuss with a therapist. The guy picked up a file on his desk and began searching through the documents inside. Beyond your workaholic tendencies, what about your time as a Navy SEAL, or the fact your father's in prison? Eric's brain had frozen somewhere around the time Hart had mentioned him being in the SEALs. He'd been careful when bringing that up to Beth around here, but maybe not careful enough. Add in the stuff the guy had managed to find out about his past and his family, and he was livid. He sat forward, ignoring Beth's shocked stare, and slammed a hand down on the desk. How did you discover all that? Everything's available on the internet, if you know where to look. Hart's small smile looked more sinister by the second, at least to Eric. We pride ourselves on doing research on all of our guests prior to their arrival at our Love Fix retreats, Mr. Harvey. Sometimes, as you did, our guests use false names to put distance between themselves and the problems of their pasts. But without all the information, we can't help you fix what's broken. What was going to be broken was this guy's face in a second if Eric didn't get out of there. Having his privacy violated like that made him feel raw and vulnerable. On the heels of his argument with Beth the night before, things were going downhill fast where his emotions were concerned. He should have known better than to let himself fall for her, to open himself up to her like he had. It never ended well. Never. Not for him. "I'm done here," Eric said, pushing to his feet. "Sweetheart, come on, let's go." "Hart, we want out of here on the next plane back home." Hart sat back in his chair and clasped his hands on the desk atop the folder with Eric's information in it. "I'm sorry you aren't satisfied with your stay here on the island. Unfortunately, there are no outbound flights until Sunday. You'll have to stay until then." Yanking open the office door harder than necessary, Eric all but dragged Beth outside behind him, which was no small feat, considering how she was digging her heels in the whole way. He led her down a path into a small tropical garden, away from the rest of the couples milling about. "Let me go!" She wrenched free of him and rubbed her wrist. "What was that about?" "The whole reason I made an appointment was so we could push him and try to learn something. Why would you drag me out like that?" "This place is messed up, Beth." He paced the quiet walkway where they stood, shielded by the foliage around them. There was nothing around except them and the sand and the birds squawking overhead. Sunlight filtered through the green leaves surrounding them, making it feel like a secluded jungle instead of the middle of a busy resort. "There's some bad stuff going down here." He was still processing what Hart had said and how he'd learned Eric's true identity. "We don't want to get involved in it, but that's why we're here, to find out what's going on. What about all the other couples here? The innocent people?" she asked, crossing her arms. "I mean, I get that you don't care about my story, but what about them? Don't you care about them? People are being taken advantage of. I need to find out how and reveal it to the world." "The risk is too high." He shook his head and looked away. "We need to go home, Beth, before something even worse happens." She watched him for a long moment, then stepped closer, laying her palm over his heart. "Calm down, okay? Just breathe for a second." He inhaled deep, then exhaled slowly, like she'd asked. "Good. Now tell me about what happened with your dad. All of it this time." At first, she'd thought he'd tell her to take a hike, but then all Eric's bravado seemed to deflate before her eyes, and he leaned back against the trunk of a large palm tree, staring down at his toes as he told her the sordid tale of his past. "My dad wasn't around much the first few years of my life," he said, digging the toe of his sandal into the sand. "He took off shortly after I was born, and didn't show up again until after I'd turned 7. Of course, I was dazzled by him, thrilled to have a dad at last. He brought us all kinds of gifts and wooed my mom and made us think he was back to stay. He paused then and seemed to gather himself for what came next. "You must have been so happy," she said softly, knowing something terrible was coming. I was. Then one day he asked me if I could help him tell a story to some people. He used this Halloween makeup on my face to make it look like I was pale and sickly, then paraded me in front of a bunch of TV stations and cameramen waiting to take my picture. At the time, he told me we were playing a game. I was acting the part of a sick kid and he was playing the kid's father. He made up this whole story about a brain tumor and an experimental surgery I needed to cure me, asking people to donate. It went on for a couple of months, him parading me out and adding to the story, then buying me a bunch of toys and stuff afterward as a reward. Then one of the national news channels picked up the story and we got major bucks from people. Nearly $250,000. He used you in a con. That's low. Despicable was the word in her head. He gave a sad sigh and her heart ached for him. My dad disappeared shortly after cashing the last check, took the money and ran. My mom and I had no clue where he was or what had happened to the funds. The FBI took her in for questioning. They threatened me with foster care, but we couldn't tell them anything about the money or my dad's whereabouts because we didn't know. We didn't hear from my dad again until he got arrested a few years later for fraud. He wanted my mother's help. She refused. By then, I was old enough to understand what he'd done, and I told him to never contact either of us again. "What happened to him?" she asked. Hart had mentioned prison. He was convicted on multiple charges. They gave him the maximum sentence since he was a repeat offender. He'd bilked people for hundreds of thousands, maybe more. The good news is that he won't get out until he's 80 at least. Beth blinked at him a moment, taking that in. "I'm so sorry, Eric. I can't imagine what that must have been like for you." "Yeah, well, it's over now." He took a deep breath and rolled his shoulders, then looked up at her. "But do you understand now why I say I know a con when I see one? That stuff Hart had on me back there. Beth, I don't go by my father's name. I haven't for years. Mom changed both our names when I was 10 to separate us from the whole scandal. Hart got past the fake name I was using to be here easily. That doesn't surprise me. But anyone searching for Eric Harvey wouldn't have found the story of my father connected to my name at all. It took some serious digging for them to find that. And if they had a file on me like that, it means they've got one on every person here, including you. That's why we need to get off this island pronto. I think he knows why you're here, that you're doing a story on his retreat. That's the reason behind the attacks. And I don't want to give him the opportunity to strike again." She wanted to argue with him about leaving, but the more he talked, the more it sounded like a sensible idea. Beth wasn't a woman who admitted defeat, who gave in, but the way Hart had acted in his office worried her. Maybe it really would be best to put the story on hold until she could make sure she and Eric would be safe. She reached out and took his hand. "Come on, let's go talk to the registration desk. I remember seeing in the brochure something about a ferry you could rent. We'll have to lie to the staff here to get them to arrange it, but once we're on board, we may be able to convince the boat crew to take us all the way back to the mainland." They made their way to the main building and up to the desk where a staffer waited. The creepy vibes she'd been getting from Robert Hart and the rest of his crew since they'd arrived on the island only intensified now. "Hi," Eric said, laying on his charm again, flashing the female staffer a sexy grin. The woman blushed slightly, but kept her expression professional. "My wife and I would like to see about renting a ferry to take us sightseeing. Is that possible?" "When would you like to go?" the woman asked, typing on her keyboard. "Today," Beth said, "if possible." The woman frowned at her computer screen. "Oh, I'm sorry. All of the ferries are reserved for today, and they're not running tomorrow due to safety inspections." Another staffer came over and whispered something in the woman's ear Beth didn't catch. She clicked a few more keys, then gave Beth and Eric the same small smile Robert Hart had earlier, the one that made Beth's skin crawl. "I've been informed there's a special private ferry that might be available for you to use today," the new arrival said, her tone flat. "If you'd like me to make the arrangements, I'm happy to do so." Eric gave Beth some serious side-eye, his expression clear. No way. Beth glanced around at all the other guests enjoying their stay. Not a care in the world. They had no idea that Eric and Beth were being threatened over here right now. What would happen if they agreed to take the special ferry? She didn't know, but she was certain she didn't want to find out. A shiver passed through her, and she reached for Eric's hand, glad for his warmth and strength. She tugged him back, away from the counter, and gave the female staffer what she hoped was a convincing smile. You know what? We don't want to cause any trouble. That's fine. We'll just find something to occupy ourselves here on the island until Sunday. Thanks so much. They headed back outside and down the path to the boardwalk, Eric continuing to glance at her. That went well. His tone dripped with sarcasm. Exactly. We're stuck here. She forced herself to continue on toward the bungalow, despite the prickling on the back of her neck like someone was watching them. She was probably just being paranoid. But it didn't change the fact they were stuck here for 2 more days, safe or not. Chapter 15. Eric patrolled the perimeter of their bungalow again before returning to the living room and hunkering down on the sofa beside Beth. Funny how paradise could turn to perdition so fast. Whatever was happening on this island, it wasn't good, and it sure had nothing to do with fixing love. You okay? He asked her, peering over her shoulder at the laptop screen while she typed away. She paused and looked up at him, her expression determined. I'm fine. I ordered us a couples massage. What? Eric balked. We're supposed to be playing it safe here. For all we know, the whole staff is out to get us. You really want to invite one into our private space? I need to interact with the staff and see what I can find out. Since we can't get off this island, I might as well do the job I came here to do. She closed the computer and leaned forward to set it on the coffee table in front of them, then stared back at him over her shoulder. I know you want to protect me, and I appreciate that. But I can't let Robert Hart and his cohorts here at the resort go on hurting people. I have to help. I'm sorry, but that's just the way I'm built. Crap. Eric scrubbed a hand over his face. Part of him wanted to argue with Beth, tell her that her security was more important than the safety of a bunch of strangers. But he couldn't, because the other part of him knew he felt the same way. It was why he'd taken care of his mother the best he could after his dad had left again, even though he'd just been a kid. Why he'd joined the Navy right out of high school and never looked back. Why he was still sticking it out here with Beth when he could have refused to participate in her plan. What his father had done to him as a kid had messed him up in a lot of ways, but it had also honed his protective, heroic instincts to a needle-sharp point. He took care of others. That's what he did. That's who he was. Period. If Beth was staying, then so was he. No way would he leave her to face whatever this island and Robert Hart had in store for them by herself. He opened his mouth to tell her so, but a knock on their door preempted his response. Beth got up and walked over to answer it, and a small Asian woman walked in with a portable massage table under each arm and a huge bag of supplies strapped across her chest. Good manners had him rushing over to help her with the load, despite the tension curdling through his bloodstream like toxic sludge. Where do you want these set up? The woman pointed to an open space near the veranda doors, and Eric walked over to get the tables ready for her. While he worked, he could hear Beth talking to the massage therapist, and she was questioning the woman about Hart and the resort. Sure, she was subtle about it, but still, he had to give it to Beth. She had bigger cojones than most SEALs he knew. An odd mix of admiration and terror flooded him because of it. Her courage and determination and heart made his chest squeeze with warmth for Beth. But at the same time, his old fears kept him cautious. Their lives were possibly on the line here, and allowing his emotions to get in the way would only put them in more danger. Beth might be an ace reporter, but she had no clue about real combat. Things could turn on a dime and go downhill fast. No, he had to stay ready, stay alert, stay prepared to fight or flee for cover at any second. And he had to make sure Beth knew what they were in for and stop taking stupid chances. I think there are some extra towels, Beth said, pointing toward a small linen closet down the hall toward their bedroom and the master bath at the rear of the bungalow. The minute they were alone, Eric strode over and took her arm, turning Beth to face him. "What are you doing? Hart's already suspicious of us. How do you know that masseuse won't go running to tell him everything we say?" "I don't, but I have to try." She pulled free, crossing her arms. "I plan to make the most of the 2 days I have left. It only makes sense. Hiding won't help, but don't worry. I can take care of myself." She tilted her head and studied him. "Or is that it? You don't think I can? You don't believe in me and what I'm trying to do here?" Cursing under his breath, Eric shook his head and looked away. "That's not it. I just don't want to see you get hurt. Or worse. I care about you, Beth. More than I should." "Do you? Then remember that the only reason we're here is because of my job." The words hurt more than he cared to admit, even though they were true. He glanced down the hall to see the masseuse still fiddling with the towels in the closet, thankfully. "I'm not going to abandon this story. I became a journalist to tell the hard stories, the dangerous stories, to shine a light on the world's injustices and help people in need. I thought you felt the same. Isn't that why you do what you do?" Eric blinked at her. She wasn't wrong. He did want to help people too. He fought for justice every day as a SEAL. But that sense of morality that was woven into his DNA was currently warring with his ever-growing feelings for Beth. This was exactly why he stayed out of relationships, stayed away from entanglements, stayed far from the emotions churning inside him. All of it made him conflicted and compromised and confused. And now, more than ever, he had to remain clear-headed and rational and hyper-aware of everything around him. "Look, Beth, Right, Mr. and Mrs. Holman," the Asian woman said, returning to the living room and handing them each a terry cloth towel from the bathroom. "Please remove your clothing and put these on. Then get up on the tables." Beth felt boneless after the massage and more than a tad sleepy. She was face down on her massage table and didn't want to move a muscle. Truth be told, she hadn't been sleeping well since she'd gotten to the island, for obvious reasons. In fact, now that she thought about it, the only time she'd really rested had been after making love with Eric. That realization both surprised and sobered her. This was not going as she'd planned. At most, she'd expected a fling, a no-strings-attached tropical affair that would blow over as soon as they set foot back on the mainland. But this thing with Eric had quickly blossomed out of control in her heart, causing her to picture how things might be after they returned to San Francisco, dating, a real relationship, maybe more. Ugh, no. She'd been down that road before with Devin and still had the skid marks on her back from his leaving her. She wouldn't put herself in that position again. She couldn't, no matter how the ache in her heart said it might already be too late. And Eric hadn't offered her anything past the week. So why was she so caught up with that in her head? The massage table beside hers creaked as Eric rolled off and onto his feet, giving her a nice view of his taut, tanned backside before he slid his board shorts back over his hips. The masseuse was busy cleaning up in the bathroom after their couple's massage, and unfortunately had been either unable or unwilling to provide Beth with any more information that she already had. "I'm going out to walk the perimeter again," Eric said before disappearing out the veranda doors. Lord help her, just the sight of him walking turned her on like nobody's business. She had it bad for the guy, and that wasn't good. With a sigh, she buried her face in the towel on the table again and closed her eyes, enjoying the last few minutes of relaxation before it was time to go back to battle. Waves crashing on the beach outside and the movements of the massage therapist in the room lulled her into a sort of meditative state, where her mind was free to work on the puzzle of her story. What did all the clues she had thus far add up to? She had those pages she and Eric had found in the business center, listing bank accounts and balances. And from their conversation with Hart, she knew that the man gathered information about his guests, way more than he had any reason or right to know. Though she supposed he had an advantage when it came to digging for information, since that much-touted Wi-Fi system really did offer exceptionally fast, reliable service. Wait. No. It couldn't be that simple, could it? She thought about all the standard boilerplate warnings she'd seen a million times when signing on to use a free public Wi-Fi signal. Didn't they say something about the connection being unsecured, meaning that information could be seen by other parties? The pieces started clicking in her head, the way they always did when a story fell into place. You could put a lot of people on a remote, isolated island, but you couldn't separate them from their devices. And once anyone connected to the Wi-Fi, Hart and his staff might be able to access their files, their emails, their internet activity. That's why the fees had been comped for the venture capitalist boyfriend of Beth's friend. Hart could use the information on the man's computer to do some insider trading. And what about other information people had on their computers? Things they wouldn't want anyone to see. Porn, evidence of affairs, references to illegal activities. People live their whole lives on their devices, including the dirty parts. Access those, and you accessed a goldmine of blackmail-worthy material. Distantly, she noted the sound of the front door of the bungalow opening, but it wasn't enough to jar Beth from her thoughts. Her instincts were singing like a Puccini opera, and suddenly she couldn't wait to get up and get dressed and get to work busting this story, and this jerk's criminal activity wide open. Unfortunately, before Beth could finish tying the belt of her robe, a strong arm reached around her from behind. At first, she thought maybe it was Eric, apologizing for their fight earlier. Then she turned slightly to look up at him and froze. Not Eric. Her blood pounded in her ears and heart tripped. "Who are you?" She started to back away, only to collide with Eric's empty massage table. "How did you get in here?" The guy, dressed all in black, had the cold, dead eyes of a shark. He kept advancing on her until she was cornered against the wall. All of her self-defense classes had told Beth to always use whatever she had at hand if she was attacked, to not let herself be taken from the premises, to scream and make a scene. She opened her mouth to yell, but the guy reached out a massive hand and grabbed her by the throat, slamming her head back against the wall and constricting both her windpipe and her vocal cords, making any speech at all impossible. Even though she struggled against him, kicking and scratching at his arms and hands and face, anywhere she could reach, she soon found herself lifted off the floor as her vision began to spider web at the periphery. She'd been right about Robert Hart. She knew it in her bones. But unless she escaped this jerk and got to freedom, she'd never be able to tell anyone. Her nails left bloody marks down her assailant's cheeks, but still the guy didn't relent. He was just too big, and no matter how strong her will to survive was, she was at a disadvantage. As the darkness descended and her world went black, her last thoughts were of Eric. He was still outside. He wouldn't know what happened to her. He wouldn't know how much she cared about him. Chapter 16. Eric returned to the bungalow and strode inside, ready to lay it all on the line with Beth. Yes, she was correct that this story was bound to be juicy, but it wasn't worth their lives. He'd carry her kicking and screaming off the island if he had to. But they were leaving, just as soon as he could pack up his stuff and get out of there. While he'd been out for his walk, he'd called a private jet company on the mainland to charter a plane for him and Beth. It had cost him a healthy chunk out of his savings, but at least she'd be safe. Now, all he had to do was find her and get her to the airport with him to catch their flight. "Beth!" he called, walking into the living room. The place was neat as a pin, the massage table and equipment gone. No sign of Beth. He frowned. Maybe she was in the bathroom. He walked down the hall and into the master suite. No sign of Beth there either. All her clothes were still neatly hung in the closet, and her toiletries were out on the counter. A niggle of dread bored into his gut as he returned to the living room. Something wasn't right here. "Beth?" he called again, but got no response. Eric glanced around, taking in the details. Her laptop was still on the coffee table beside her half-finished cup of tea and her phone. His thoughts snagged on that. She never went anywhere without her phone, even here, where she hardly ever got a decent signal. If she wasn't here and her phone was, that was a sure sign something was wrong. Adrenaline raced through him as panic set in. Robert Hart's face from earlier popped into his head. If that jerk had so much as touched one hair on Beth's head, he'd fillet the guy open with his pocket knife and turn him into fish food. He strode back into the bedroom and pulled out his Glock from his duffel bag along with an extra magazine of ammo, which he shoved into the pocket of his shorts. The island wasn't that big, and he hadn't been gone that long. Beth still had to be here somewhere close by. He just had to find her. If he hadn't gone off to walk the perimeter, maybe she'd still be safe in the bungalow. No, he couldn't think like that. Not right now. He had to stay focused if he wanted to keep Beth alive. His curses echoed along with his footsteps pounding down the boardwalk back to the land. As he made his way up the path toward the main building, Eric decided that what he needed to do was call his buddy at the Coast Guard, who was stationed in Florida. This far from the mainland, he wasn't sure if the island fell under their jurisdiction, but he needed all the help he could get right now, and he and Beth were both American citizens. That had to count for something, right? But his phone was showing no signal at all at the moment, which meant he needed to get to a landline, even if that meant commandeering a phone by force. Eric made his way up to the main building, then inside. The place was oddly quiet, hauntingly so. In fact, there didn't seem to be another soul around except him. In the distance, he heard Robert Hart droning on with more New Age crap in the building next door. They were having another therapy session. That must explain the lack of staff in here. That solved one problem. No one was blocking him from the landline phone. He dialed Tig's office number. "Coast Guard, Islamorada Base," a switchboard operator answered. "Captain Morales, please." "One moment, please." "Captain Morales speaking." His friend's voice rang over the line, and Eric didn't think he'd ever been so grateful in his life. He could catch these guys on his own, sure, but then what would he do with them afterward? "Hey, Tig, it's Eric." "Dude," Tiguan Morales said, his tone warming. "Long time, no talk. What's up?" Eric gave him a rundown of what had happened on the island thus far. "I could really use some backup, buddy. I'm on it. That island is on the fringe of our jurisdiction, and we've had our eye on Hart for a while. There's definitely something odd about him and that place he runs. We thought he was into drug smuggling at first, but that didn't seem to be it," Tig said. "What do you know?" "Hart seems to deal in information, if my guess is right. He digs into his guests' lives, finds their secrets. Maybe it's blackmail on a high level. And I suspect he's also stealing from their accounts. We found lists of accounts and balances." "That would explain a lot," Tig said. "I'll get a crew together and leave now, but it'll still take us about an hour to get there, even at top speed." "That'll do. I can hold them off until then, I'm sure." "Thanks." Eric ended the call, then searched the back rooms and the computer room. No one there either, and no Beth. He did, however, find more reports on the printer filled with more bank accounts and balances. This time, his was there too. If he hadn't been angry before, he was now. Eric wasn't a rich guy. He made an okay living in the SEALs, but that was about it. Screw Robert Hart and his staff if they thought they could steal from him or anyone else. Renewed rage boiled inside him, mixing with the desperation and determination to find Beth and make sure she was okay, pushing his steps faster until he jogged out of the building, past the rec room and beyond the restaurant. No sign of Beth. He made himself stop and consider the most likely place to take someone on the small island. When he considered the possibilities, he shuddered. They'd driven through undeveloped jungle on the way to the place where they'd climbed a few days earlier. It would be easy to hide someone there. Easy to hide a body. That thought hit him in the gut, and he reeled himself in. He wasn't going to think like that. Beth was alive and waiting for him to come to her. He forced himself to be rational. Hart would want her close, so he could question her and find out what she knew. He was enough of an egomaniac to want to tell her what he was up to. He'd brag about it even. Then, he'd make her disappear. It was Eric's job to find her before that could happen. Eric pictured the entire complex in his head. He'd jogged the perimeter, learning it as part of his security measures. His thoughts went to a smaller maintenance building in the back of the resort. He'd gone by it a few times and had noticed groundskeepers and such gathered there, but it was later in the day now and that staff had probably gone home. The maintenance area was likely empty. If he was going to kidnap someone and try to hide them away, that would be where he'd take them. He sprinted toward the area, pulling up to surveil the spot when he neared it. The area seemed deserted, But looks could be deceiving. Breath panting loud in his ears, he pressed his back to the stucco wall of the building and skirted his way around to the door, gun at the ready. He paused to listen. From inside he heard a scuffling noise, confirming his suspicions. Something, or someone, was in there. He only hoped it was Beth. This building had few windows, just two near the front, and when he leaned sideways to peer quickly through one, it was too dark inside to make out anything more than vague shapes. Not ideal. There was only one way to find out if she was being held in there, and that was to go in. After a silent prayer for safety, he swiveled fast and kicked at the door. It crashed open and slammed against the wall before rebounding back. Silence hung heavy and foreboding inside. Gun first, Eric slowly made his way inside, scanning the shadows for any sign of attack. Sunlight streamed through the dust-filled air, and the lonely cry of a seagull pierced the air. From the corner of his eye, he saw a flash of white, and turned to see the edge of a robe. The same kind of robe he and Beth had been wearing for their massages. Heart in his throat, he rushed over to find her tied up and secured to some metal pipes on the walls. Her mouth was duct-taped shut, but her eyes were pleading with him to get her out of there. Eric clicked on the safety on his Glock and set it aside as he knelt in front of her. Her urgent grunts and head bobs toward him told him she wanted that tape off of her mouth. Now. He winced slightly as he got his nail under the corner. "This is going to hurt, sweetheart." Beth grunted, her dark brows drawn together in a scowl as if to say, "Get on with it already." He would have smiled if they hadn't been in so much danger. With one swift jerk, he pulled the tape off. Her skin beneath was raw and red, but he'd never seen a more beautiful sight in his life than Beth alive and well and ready to fight. "Sweetheart," he said, cupping her cheeks. "Are you okay? Who did this?" "One of Hart's goons. I'd never seen the guy before, but he was built like an ox." She wriggled in his hands. "Hurry. He'll be back soon, and we have to be ready for him this time." Pulling out his pocket knife, Eric quickly sliced through the ropes, holding her hands and ankles, then helped Beth to her feet. "Let's get out of here," he said as he picked up his gun. "And go where? There's no way off the island. We need to make a stand. We have one advantage on our side. Hart and his guys don't know you've rescued me." He liked her logic, and if he was here with his SEAL team, that's exactly what they'd do. But this wasn't a mission, and she wasn't a trained warrior. Most of all, though, he couldn't stand the thought of her in more danger. "We can hole up until the Coast Guard arrives. I called a friend of mine, and they're on their way, but it'll be another 40 minutes at least," Eric said with a quick check of his watch. Beth's face glowed with excitement. "By then, we'll be able to hand Hart over to them. I figured out what he's doing. It all clicked while I was tied up here. He's mining people's computers for personal information, to use for blackmail." He'd gotten that far, too. "Exactly. And to gain information he can use for insider stock trading." She was pacing, ticking off ideas on her fingers. "As far as the bank accounts go, I think he's doing what a lot of legitimate banks do. He's taking money out at night, earning interest on it, and returning it to the account in the morning. It's little amounts that can add up fast. He's got quite a network of deceit going on," Eric observed. He'd taken up a post by the window to watch for anyone approaching. "That computer room must be a busy place at night." He nodded his agreement. "Hart's been running the ultimate con. Bring people to a remote location, gain their trust, and rob them blind. But these are smart people. I don't think Hart has actually gotten away with it. Not completely. The guests who get hit the hardest know what he's done, but he's gained power over them by viewing what's on their computers. They can't turn him in without risking him revealing sensitive information about themselves. Beth, we've got to move and find someplace safe. If he didn't get her out of there soon, it would be too late." "Group therapy's almost over," Beth said. "They'll come back here to kill me. That's when we can get them." He saw the determination written all over her face, even as his gut was screaming at him to protect her. He might regret this. "Take my knife. Use it if you need to." Eric sent a quick text to Tig. letting him know his location and current situation before taking up guard beside the busted door, while Beth stuck close behind him. The warmth and nearness of her had him wanting to turn and sweep her into his arms and confess his feelings for her. But now wasn't the time or the place. Not until Hart and his staff were in custody and Beth was safe. Of course, then they'd be on their way back to San Francisco and their fake relationship would be over. His chest pinched at the thought before he shoved it aside. That was a chance he would have to take. Stay sharp. Stay focused. "Hey," Beth said beside him, her soft tone melting his resistance. "Thanks for rescuing me." He looked back at her over his shoulder. "Anytime, sweetheart, anytime." Chapter 17. "They're coming," Beth said, from her post beside the window a short time later. He gave her a silent nod, and she gripped the hilt of his pocket knife tighter in her sweaty palm. She'd come here looking for a story, and she'd certainly found one. When she'd filled Eric in on her suspicions about what Hart was doing, the tightness in his jaw and steely glint in his eye had shown her he was just as upset as she was about it all. "Ready, sweetheart?" Eric whispered from his place behind what was left of the door. "Yes," she said. And she was. Ready for this all to be over so she could be alone with Eric again and tell him how she really felt. But first, she had a goon to deal with. Her throat still felt sore from where he'd squeezed it early, and that wasn't even counting the tape burns around her mouth. Yeah, she'd gladly punch that guy's nads into next year for that. She could do it too. Heath had shown her how. According to Eric's instructions, she was supposed to wait until the goon was inside, then jump out at him with the knife. Eric would then come out from behind the door with his gun pointed at the goon and force him to surrender. She only hoped the old stereotype of big and stupid held true in this instance. Sure enough, the goon who'd kidnapped her walked inside, cursing loudly when he saw the door busted open. Only problem was, he was on a walkie-talkie talking to Hart when he did it. "Yeah, she's gone, sir," the guy said. "No, I don't know how. Looks like someone busted in and helped her out." The goon bent over to inspect the cut ropes on the floor, and Beth seized her chance, running at him and stabbing him in the arm with the knife. The guy yelled and turned while lashing out, knocking Beth sideways and sending the knife skittering away. Eric stepped out from behind the door, gun aimed at the guy's chest. "Touch her again, and you die." "You first," Robert Hart said from the doorway, his own pistol aimed at Eric. He flashed that creepy smile of his again, then clicked off his phone and shoved it into his pocket. "Over there with your wife, or girlfriend, or whatever she is." He gestured with his gun toward where Beth stood. "And place your weapon on the floor, slowly. Good. Don't try anything either. My staff have you surrounded." Eric glanced at Beth, then did as Hart asked before inching his way over to where she stood, his hands up. "You won't get away with this," Beth said, raising her chin defiantly. "I've already emailed my editor everything. If I turn up dead, he'll publish it all anyway. This is over, Hart." It was a lie, of course, but if it made Hart hesitate and bought them some time, it was all good. Eric gave her a quick side glance, but she refused to show fear no matter how much terror was coiling inside her like a cobra. "Mrs. Holman," Hart said, smirking. "Or should I call you Miss Williams? That's your real name, right?" He rattled off her address in San Francisco and her parents' names and address too. Her chest constricted with fear, though she didn't let it show. She'd put too much time into this story, sacrificed too much to get here to give up so easily now. They'd find a way out of this because they had to. Eric wouldn't let her down. She believed in him now as much as she believed in her own abilities, which was saying something. "You think I plan to run these stupid retreats for the rest of my life?" Hart continued. "Hardly. With this last round of intel, I've got access to enough cash to last me a lifetime. Now all I have to do is get away." "That's what you do, isn't it?" Eric asked. "Hack into people's accounts and use the information for insider trading or for blackmail?" At first, she couldn't understand why Eric asked those questions. They knew the answers. Then she realized that it was a stalling tactic. He was waiting for his opportunity to strike, She willed herself to be ready too. Hart smiled, happy to brag about his criminal activity. How she wished for a recorder so she could get every word to use against him later. Of course. With the right pressure, I find people will do anything I want. Funny how much incriminating evidence people keep saved on their hard drives. But I know all their dirty little secrets. And by accessing their bank accounts, I know exactly how much they can afford to pay me to keep my mouth shut. You're pathetic, Beth said, disgusted. Those people came here because they trusted you. Their fault. Hart shrugged and smiled at Eric again. Ask him. He knows. You should never trust anyone. I think your father and I would get along well together. For once we agree, Eric bit out, his posture stiff beside Beth. She longed to hug him and tell him that wasn't true, that he could trust her, but that would have to wait until this was over and they were safe. Eric took a deep breath, his gaze darting out the door before returning to Hart. Maybe you'll get to meet him after all. Really? Hart gave a mirthless chuckle. How? Is he getting out on parole soon? Beth looked out the door too and spotted movement in the foliage. Her pulse tripled. It could be the Coast Guard, or it could be Hart's staff. The thick leaves made it hard to tell. No, I figure you'll get life for fraud and attempted murder, Eric said. You two could end up as cellmates. Oh, I'm not going to prison. Hart stepped closer to them and cocked the trigger. Now get down on your knees, both of you. Much cleaner that way. What about the other guests? Beth asked, stalling. Where was the Coast Guard? What if they wander over here? What if they hear the shots? They won't. They're back on the other side of the island again, doing more cliff climbing. Hart grinned, all white teeth and menace. Handy how that worked out, huh? Of course, it would have been easier if you died there when you were supposed to, so we could make it look like an accident. But this will have to do. On your knees, please. The fact he was polite about it only made it scarier. Beth dropped down, the cement floor icy through the terry cloth of her robe. Eric knelt beside her, his warmth a stark contrast to cold. His hand brushed hers and she twined her pinky finger around his, tears stinging the back of her eyes. She'd always imagined herself immortal, able to get out of any scrape, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound like some kind of freaking superhero. She wasn't feeling so super now. I'm sorry, she whispered to Eric, her gaze lowered. I'm sorry I dragged you into this, and I'm sorry I can't get you out of it now. Mostly, I'm sorry I never got to tell you that I've fallen in love with you. Eric squeezed her finger tight with his gaze trained on Hart. I love you too, sweetheart, and don't be sorry. I make my own decisions, and I chose to be here. With you. Always. Even after we leave here, if you want me. Hart rolled his eyes. Stop with the BS already. The gig is up. You don't have to pretend anymore. I know who you both really are and why you came here. It's not pretend anymore, she and Eric said in unison. Joy blossomed within her despite the situation. He loved her and she loved him. And if they got out of this alive, she wasn't going to let him out of her bed for a good week at least. Well, that's unfortunate then, because you're both going to die. But perhaps you can find each other again in the afterlife. If you believe in all that happily ever after BS, Hart said, his flat tone stating he clearly didn't. A week ago, Beth would have agreed with him. But now, after spending days in paradise with Eric, she'd become a convert. Time seemed to slow as Hart raised the gun and prepared to fire. Beth squeezed her eyes shut and held on to Eric for dear life. Suddenly, she was being shoved sideways. Her eyes flew open in time to see Eric charge at Hart and his raised gun. The deafening sound of a bullet filled the building. Eric, she screamed. He was on top of Hart, wrestling with him, and blood spilled out onto the concrete floor. The air smelled of coppery blood and gunpowder. Was Eric shot? She tried to struggle to her feet, but stopped when a booming voice commanded, "Freeze! U.S. Coast Guard!" They'd arrived, but was it too late for Eric? Oh God, please don't let it be too late. A Coast Guard officer, the same size and build as Eric, strode over to the fighting men just as Eric jumped to his feet. He was safe. He was okay. Hart was rolling around on the ground, holding his injured right arm, blood pooling on the ground beneath him from his bullet wound. The Coast Guard officer knelt over him, while another officer kicked Hart's weapon away and secured the area. Beth couldn't seem to stop shaking. She'd come so close to losing Eric. Hart had nearly killed them both. He would have if Eric hadn't saved them. Her brain was telling her that she wasn't a woman who needed saving. But she had been. She'd needed Eric to be there. He was coming toward now, and she knew she needed him more than she needed her next breath. She flung her arms around him and held him tight. "You're alive. I was so scared." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Eric held her close and kissed the top of her hair. "But we're good. We're safe." He gave a nod and waved to the Coast Guard officer who was hauling Hart off the floor and handing him over to another officer for processing. "Meet my friend Tig, who almost saved the day, before I ended up having to do it myself." "Sorry it took a bit longer than expected to get here." Tig joined them and shook hands with Eric before being introduced to Beth. "I called in the FBI to help us round these guys up. Seems your friend Hart here's on everyone's radar." "He's not my friend," Eric grunted, pulling Beth closer into his side. "And she's going to break the story of what he's been up to here and become famous for it." "Is she now?" Tig asked, cocking his head toward Beth. "Of course she is," Beth answered, slipping her arm around Eric's waist and grinning. "But first, I think a hot bath would be nice." "Agreed." Eric winked at her. "Shall we?" Rising on tiptoes, she kissed him, then took his hand and tugged him toward the door. "We shall." Chapter 18. A week later, they were back in San Francisco, and Beth was at her desk at the Frisco Times. It was the same space she'd occupied before, but now it felt so different. Maybe it was because she'd nearly been killed. Maybe it was because she'd just returned from a week in the tropics. Maybe it was because she was in love. For the first time, that word didn't conjure any pain or regret or guilt. She loved Eric, and he loved her. Now, if she could just get her brother to quit yelling in her ear about it, things would be great. "Are you sure, sis?" Heath said over the phone line. "I don't think you've thought this through. Eric's not a forever kind of guy." Beth exhaled slowly and pinched the bridge of her nose between her thumb and forefinger. "First of all, I'm telling you about us out of courtesy, not because we need your permission or your blessing. Second, who says I want forever? Maybe I just want Mr. Right Now, and Eric's more than capable of filling that bill." Images of him driving into her the night before, filling her so completely she didn't know where she ended, and he started, made her blush. She swiveled in her chair to face her desk again. She was getting more than enough crap from her brother right now. She didn't need her nosy co-workers joining in the fun, too. "Can't you just be happy for us, Heath?" Beth asked, her voice low. "Please?" Her brother gave an aggrieved sigh. "Are you sure this is what you want?" "I am." "And nothing I say can dissuade you?" "Nope." "Then, fine." Heath took a deep breath. "Eric called me earlier. He says he cares about you too. He's a good guy, Beth, despite my concerns." "I know." She sat back and grinned. "I'm really happy with him." "Good, because I think—" A commotion started on the other side of the office, and Beth turned toward the elevators to see a massive clump of pastel-colored balloons emerge. "Hang on, Heath. I'm going to have to call you back." Eric walked toward her, the balloons in one hand and a wrapped gift under the other, his smile brightening her entire universe. Yep, there weren't enough hard-eyed emojis in the universe to capture how much she loved this guy. He stopped at her desk and let the balloons drift toward the ceiling of her cubicle as her co-workers gathered around to listen in. "How'd your call with your CO go?" she asked. It was the one dark cloud looming on their horizon. He still had 6 months left on his deployment, and once he got the green light, he'd be rejoining his team. Once again, Beth would be left behind. But this time, she'd have a career that was undeniably a success after breaking the Hart story. She'd been featured on all the major news networks, and her phone was ringing off the hook for more interviews internationally. The press had nicknamed her the Heartbreaker for Pete's sake. A woman didn't turn her back on that. And while he would be leaving her, she knew Eric would come back to her too. He'd been so happy for her newfound success, and even accompanied her cross-country for her interviews in New York. She couldn't ask him to give up the career he loved, no matter how it might hurt to let him go. As expected, he said, his gaze locked on hers. They'll be sending me new orders next week. Oh. She forced her smile to remain steady, despite the stab of pain in her heart. That's fantastic. It's good, yeah. He shrugged and stepped farther into her cubicle to gain a bit more privacy. The sooner I get back to my team, the sooner my deployment will be over and I'll be done for good. Yeah, she said, still focused on keeping it together and not crying in front of him. It took a moment for his words to register. When they did, she looked up at him, shocked. Wait, what? After this tour, I'm retiring, he said. I've put my time in and done my duty, but now I want more. Beth was still trying to wrap her head around that when he went down on one knee in front of her and handed her the small wrapped gift box from under his arm. Her fingers shook as she took it from him. What's this? Open it and find out, he said, his warm brown eyes shining with affection. Never one to back down from a challenge, Beth ripped the paper off and opened the box to see a heart-shaped cookie inside with the words, "Will you marry me?" scrawled across the top in pink frosting. Eric took her hand and kissed the back before whispering, I know we've only known each other a few weeks and all this is happening really fast, but when I'm with you, I feel like I've never felt before. You make me happy. You're smart and funny and beautiful and brave, and I love everything about you. Even when you drive me nuts, I can't stop loving you. And somehow, some way, you made me trust you. I didn't think it was possible, but there it is. I'd love nothing more than to spend the rest of my life getting to know you and doing my best to make you as happy as you make me. Tears stung her eyes, and this time she did nothing to hold them back. Being strong and successful was fine, but ambition meant nothing without having love behind it. Eric had taught her that. Her life before had been all about reaching her external goals, but now she wanted more too. She wanted a future, with him. Sniffling, she set the cookie aside and leaned forward to kiss him. Yes, I'll marry you and have gorgeous babies with you and travel the world with you. Whatever you want to do, I'm yours. He gave a whoop and stood, picking her up and kissing her soundly in front of God and everyone. The nosy co-workers must have approved because applause broke out in the office. By the time Beth pulled away, they were both breathless. She smoothed her hands down the front of his white t-shirt and smiled. I just talked to Heath and he's okay with it. Not that it matters. Yeah, I got his blessing too, Eric said, pulling her close again. Not that it matters. All that matters now is you and me, sweetheart. I love you, Beth. She kissed him sweetly, then nodded. I love you too, Eric. Now let's get out of here and start making those babies. My employer's got an excellent maternity plan I'm dying to investigate. Chapter 19. 1 year later. Eric took a minute to look over the gathering and process the amazing ways his life had changed in the past year. He was retired from the SEALs and working for a security company as a systems analyst, a job he found fulfilling and interesting. He was grounded, living in one place and not traveling the world. Most of all, he had Beth. He got to go home every night to her, listen to her talk about her day and share her latest discoveries on whatever story she was chasing at the moment. He loved the way her eyes brightened when she was excited about following a lead. One thing he could never have anticipated was being back at Hart's Retreat, now owned by another company, a legitimate one, and run as a destination wedding venue. When Beth had told him that she wanted their wedding to take place where they'd fallen in love, he'd worried it was a bad idea. Would being back at the resort dredge up negative memories? But it hadn't. She'd been right. He was learning that she usually was. He was learning so much about the woman he loved. She was in the middle of the open rec room where the ping-pong tables once stood, dancing with her friend Layla to something with a Latin beat. Beth's floor-length white gown swishing around her body with her movements. Glad they have each other to dance with. Gets me out of it. Clint walked up to Eric and handed him a beer. The two former SEALs had become friendly since Eric's retirement, which was good because their wives were besties. You got that right. They clinked bottles and drank. Other active and former SEALs were there too. He raised his bottle to Heath, who was dancing with one of the bridesmaids. Despite his reservations, Heath had come around to Eric and Beth being together. He'd even been Eric's best man. At one of the tables, Eric's mother sat with Beth's parents. The three of them had hit it off from the first time they met. They were laughing about something and sipping champagne. A toddler broke away from a group of kids who were dancing together and dashed up to them, before flinging his arms around Clint's legs and turning an adorable face upward. "Daddy!" Clint set his beer on a table and hoisted the boy up in his arms. "Having fun, Thomas?" The kid nodded vigorously. Thomas wasn't Clint's biological son, but he'd become a father to him in every sense of the word when he married Layla. "There are my boys." Layla came toward them as the music shifted to something slower. "I want both of you to dance with me." She drew her husband and son onto the dance floor, where the three of them swayed to the music together. "Hello, Hubs." Beth came toward him and wrapped her arm through his. She'd called him that once in this very space. At the time, it had been a taunt. Now, it was an endearment that he wasn't going to get tired of hearing anytime soon. "You're beautiful," he said, and leaned to kiss her. "The most beautiful bride ever." "I think all new husbands are supposed to say that," she said, but she looked pleased at the compliment. "They should mean it too. I certainly do." He'd nearly embarrassed himself by crying when he'd seen her come down the aisle toward him. She'd been radiant, smiling, and joyful. Most of all, she was his. "Dance with me." She gave his arm a tug, and he was happy to comply. He was no dancer, but if she wanted him to, he would gladly. He'd never complain about the chance to put his arms around her. Other couples made room for them on the crowded floor, and they were soon swaying together, her head on his shoulder. He was enjoying the reception, but with their bodies so close together, it made him think about being alone with her. They'd chosen to stay in the same bungalow they'd been in a year ago. That bathtub seemed like a perfect place to start a more intimate celebration of their wedding night. The song wasn't even half over when she looked up at him and spoke. "Eric, I want to tell you something." Her eyes searched his. "Do you have any idea what it might be?" "You're going to Antarctica for a story?" he guessed. That wouldn't surprise him. She shook her head. "No, too cold there for me." "You've decided to take the job in Atlanta after all." They'd discussed the possibility after she'd received an excellent offer from a newspaper there. "No, I'm staying where I'm at for now. It'll be easier that way." Easier for what? What was she trying to tell him? He slowed their steps and just held her. "What is it, sweetheart? You know how I mentioned that maternity plan my employer has." She gave him a smile. "I'm going to need it in a little less than 7 months." "Beth." His whole world stopped for a moment as her words hit home. "Are you pregnant?" She nodded. "We're going to have a baby." Wow, a baby! The day had already brought him so much happiness that he was on joy overload. Her smile was huge now. "I thought you'd like that. I love it." He framed her face with his hands. "I love you." He kissed her, pouring all he felt for this amazing woman into it. Around them, their guests applauded, but that all faded into the background. In that moment, nothing mattered to him but his bride, their baby, and their future together.